All right, it's 11:04. Good morning. This is the Marquette Township Board special meeting. Today is Friday, November 22nd, 2019, and we are here for the purpose of interviewing candidates for the position of Township Manager. If you would join us in the pledge, let's start with that, okay?
Okay.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, Randy.
Okay, trustee Everson is absent and excused at the moment. Trustee LaRue.
Here.
Trustee Wiegand.
Here.
Trustee Marks.
Present.
Treasurer Johnson.
Yes.
Clerk Rattari is here, and Supervisor Duran.
Here.
Staff present will be Manager Gerard when he gets here.
Had to run and do something. All right, thanks, Randy. First of all, I have to congratulate you for the awesome job you did on the electronics. We have a Skype today at 5 o'clock, and he's got microphones and cameras and stuff is all set.
Yeah, we should be all set for that.
Yeah, great. Our first candidate today, let's see.
Well, public comment.
Yes, public comment. I just kind of realized that. Does anybody want to make any comments before we start? Okay, sounds good. And we don't have any comment in relation to public comment. And I hope we don't have any conflicts of interest today. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
I'll move to accept the agenda as presented.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay. We have 4 candidates today, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. And we are going to be recording this. Our regular board meetings are recorded visually and orally and on YouTube, so the public will be able to follow along with us. The plan today is to try to give the candidate about 10 minutes to have whatever they want to say to us as an introduction, or what they know about us or don't know. Maybe 5 minutes per question, roughly. And we have 7 questions. Each board member will ask one. We have 8. I have one last one. And then 10-minute follow-up for maybe, hi Dan, we just started. It's okay. I'm glad you're here. We have about 10 minutes at the end that the candidate can ask questions. That's right, we're just starting. So we're guessing about an hour. Now, we did start a little bit late, about 5 minutes late, so that should give everybody a chance. And if there are oddball questions at the end, absolutely, something comes up. So this morning, first off, we have Jennifer James Meslow. And Jennifer, if you want to come over to the little table, purpose for that is that the camera will be able to see you a little bit too. We don't want to have backs of heads. Is the microphone on?
Yes.
Okay. That sounds good. So our first question, unless any board members have any questions or anything? Yes. Did I miss something?
We're going right into the first question. I thought you had 10 minutes to say something.
Oh, yes, thank you. Miss Jennifer, thank you for coming. You made a couple-hour drive in the snow this morning to join us. So whatever you want to tell us about Jennifer.
Okay,
Feel
thank
free.
you so much. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
When you do a new microphone, you always need to kind of test your volume and see where you are. Wonderful. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to present my credentials to you. Again, my name is Jennifer James Meslow. I'm a results-driven professional, and I have 27 years as a professional. 15 of those years have been in public service. And so of those 15 years, and some of those 27 as well, I have quite a bit of experience in municipal management, so government management. I've been a village manager in Newberry since January of 17, so just shy of 3 years. have quite a bit of experience with government budgeting, which, as you know, is quite a bit different than just your personal checking account. Fund accounting and enterprise funds and bond debt and all of these kinds of things, they're very unique to governments, and so I do have quite a bit of experience with that. Also, lobbying is something that I have in my background. Grant writing, crisis and emergency risk communication. So I am previously was involved in public relations, and I can go into some more detail about that. I have expertise in public safety, so law enforcement, fire department, emergency management. Have experience in public health, higher education, agriculture, water quality, planning and zoning. So I think the thing that I would like to present to you is my background is very extensive, and as a manager, I think it's important for individuals to have sort of know a little bit about everything. And so if I may, I'd like to expound upon that a little bit. One of the reasons I think that I'm a good fit for this position is I think it's important for the candidate to be a good fit for the community. It's not just can you do the job and do you have the skill sets, but does your personality and the way you do things mesh with the community? And I do have a proven track record in Marquette. I was a resident for 4 years and very much enjoyed my time here. I was the program coordinator for the Masters of Public Administration program at Northern Michigan University. And so my husband and I and my son, we moved to Marquette in 2013. And so I was in charge of the public admin program. And I did that for about 4 years. And in that, I wound up getting very involved in the community, and I was a member of the Marquette West Rotary Club, and I was the president of that organization, which I am very pleased to say that was the second club that I had been the president of. But my interest is that I really feel that my personality has already meshed well with the community of Marquette, and I have a lot of experience with the university. And being an organization that definitely relies on the university, I think it's good to have good relations with them. Did you have a question? Oh, you seemed like you might have had a question. No. So from a professional perspective, I would like to expound a little bit on some of the things that I shared. As I mentioned, I have been a village manager since January of 2017. And when I went to Newberry, it was an organization that was sort of on the brink of a massive change. The council, when I went there, didn't realize their financial situation. They didn't realize that it was as bad as it was. And soon after I got there, we identified that we were months away from bouncing checks and basically redlining. And so that's not a good place for a government to start bouncing checks. Over 300,000, we were going to start bouncing checks, and then it was going to get worse from there. So when I got there, there was a significant financial crisis. And so when you jump into an organization from the very beginning and you have a financial crisis, it really, it's sort of that intensity where you have to learn a lot really quickly. And so one of the things that we had to do was really evaluate the budget, the finances. We wound up redoing the chart of accounts. We wound up basically throwing out the entire budget and started over. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that unless you really have to. We started from zero. And if you're familiar with the concept of zero-based budgeting, like I said, that's not something you typically do for an entire organization. So in all of that, it was a very intense learning experience. My time in Newberry has been that it's very similar to what you have here in some ways, where it's a full-service utility, so water, sewer, electric, garbage, parks and recreation, fire department, planning, and taxes, so we obviously have a treasurer as well. And so these are things that I have experience with, and I think particularly government budgeting is important to know a lot about. Also, I am a former legislative aide for a state senator, and during that time, I did a lot of lobbying at the state capitol and at the federal capitol, and so that's something that I have experience with as well, drafting bills and legislation. Also, I have experience as a grant writer. In one of my positions, I was the director of grants for Lee Memorial Health System, which is a very large hospital system in Southwest Florida. They have about 5 hospitals, and so have done quite a bit of extensive grant writing. Since I came to Newberry, we have received over $200,000 in grants that I was responsible for writing or co-writing. Since my time there, we also were awarded a SAW grant, which I know you have had one as well, and it was for $593,000, and that was in 2018. I did not write that one. That one was written 5 years before, and you know how you kind of get in the queue, and Newberry's turn finally came up. So not only do I have extensive experience in writing grants, I also have experience in managing them as well. And that all of the paperwork that can go along with managing a grant is very cumbersome, and it's very much attention to detail. Also, I have experience, like I mentioned, in communications. So one of my positions, I worked as the public information officer for the Florida Department of Health in Lee County. The Florida Department of Health is a state agency in Florida of about 17,000 employees, so it's quite a big organization. I was responsible to go on the news every day. That was my job. And so I was the one that said, hey, what's going on in the community? And I was the one that needed to go on the news and talk about it. I've done hundreds upon hundreds of interviews, whether they be on TV, radio, online chats, a whole extensive host of interviewing. The media markets that I routinely worked in was the 12th media market in the country, which is the Sarasota-Tampa, which is about 1.8 million people. And the one that I worked in pretty much every day was 53, ranked 53 in the U.S. To put it into perspective, Marquette's media market is 180. So the media markets that I did work in were quite a bit bigger, so I do have experience. So if you say, hey, we need a spokesperson for the organization, we need you to go on TV, we need you to be on the radio, I can do that. The Florida Department of Health also, too, once I did come to NMU in 2016, hired me to train 50 of their other public information officers in the state of Florida. And I designed a 6-week online program, designed it and taught it. And we ran that through the Jacobetti Center at Northern. So that's something else. Public safety, I have experience in public safety, where there's law enforcement, fire, emergency management. I am a former faculty member at Florida Gulf Coast University in their criminal justice department, and I am a peer-reviewed author in issues such as canine, less lethal weapons, use of force. It's always fun to test grenade launchers. That's actually something I've done. So that's a little bit unique. But currently, when I was in Newberry, we had a fire department. And so I was very familiar with how to manage a fire department, which I know you have as well, and also 27 firefighters. My emergency management experience comes from being a public information officer for the Lee County Health Department, and also during that time I acquired 10 certificates in Incident Command System, ICS. So I also taught emergency management at the undergrad level as well. So these are just a handful of things that I have done over the last 27 years. My education is I have a PhD in public affairs from the University of Central Florida. I have a master's degree in public administration from Florida Gulf Coast University, and I have a bachelor's degree in public relations from the University of Florida. Can I say go Gators? I won't get stoned too bad. So you can see that definitely if there was a degree in public, I managed to get it, except public policy. I decided I had had enough schooling at the moment. So I think that's a pretty succinct overview of my background, and hopefully it gives you a little bit more information about who I am and what I've been doing for the last several years before you met me.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we can start with questions. John gets the first one.
Thank you for being with us today. The first question that we have that we'd like to hear from you on is we'd like you to describe your understanding of charter township government and the differences from general law government, if you could. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. My understanding is that charter townships are what I would akin more to a special district. They have an express purpose, and so they have specific things that they are required to do and constitutionally do, whereas a general law township would be more of, if it's not prohibited, then they can do it. I think it's more similar to cities. As far as charter township, my understanding is the change occurred in, was it 1947 maybe, where a lot of the townships in the state of Michigan wound up transferring over to a charter. The governing document, the law that a charter township falls under is the Michigan Township Charter Act. I believe that was, is it PA, can't remember the PA number, but I think it was done in 1947. And so it provides for 7 trustees, and there is an election process that goes on for each of the 7. There's a treasurer, a clerk, a supervisor, and then 4 additional. It does talk about you can have a superintendent, and you can also hire a manager. Typically, charters will have different responsibilities and can levy taxes, typically take care of the taxes and elections, and I think that's kind of where I am with that at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Any follow-up to that? Okay. My question is, the board has adopted policy governance. Describe your understanding of it and how the manager's position relates to the board.
Policy governance? Okay. My concept of policy would be that any elected body would set policy, and the manager would then implement what that policy is. So if there are specific administrative concerns that you have, oftentimes there will be more broad policy. We want to increase walkability, and we want a policy where the organization encourages sustainability and walkability. And then, so that would be maybe a broad policy concept, and then, you know, you could determine from your manager if you had specifics that you wanted to be done, or you could come up with different objectives. Strategic plans are very much a piece of this, as are master plans. And so from a policy perspective, my understanding is that in all elected groups, that the policy is set by the elected body, and then it is carried out from the administrative level by the staff.
Follow-up to that?
Have you worked with policy governance?
That specific term is not something that I have heard in the past. However, my understanding of policy is what I discussed.
Right.
Okay. Okay, next question is Ernie's.
Okay, thank you for being here. Question I have is, describe the process you would follow to establish a strategic plan for the township.
Okay. Strategic planning is absolutely something that I think is very important for all government entities. I have a very extensive background in the precursor to strategic planning, because oftentimes what happens is organizations will say, hey, we want to increase walkability or sustainability, but a lot of times organizations don't know what they've been doing or where they currently are. And so it's very good from a strategic planning perspective to start with program eval and determine what are you currently doing? What are your staff doing? What kind of outcomes are you currently getting? What kind of community perceptions do you have? Really look at where are you currently and then decide where you want to go. From a strategic planning perspective, you know, one of the things that you often see is very broad stroke statements that have a somewhat of a vagueness to them. You know, they oftentimes are more couched in a mission vision kind of concept, and I think it's very important for all strategic plans to have some specifics to them. So if you're familiar with the SMART concept, you might have heard that. It's been around forever, I think. So it's specific, measurable, achievable, reliable, and timely. And so I think if you're doing a strategic plan, it's very important that it have those components to it. One of the things that a lot of organizations will do is they say, we want to increase or we want to decrease and fill in the blank. We want to have a better sense of place. Okay, so let's use that as an example. That is a very broad statement. How do you measure that? How do you know if you have moved that dial from one side to the other? How do you know? And so when you do strategic planning, it's really important to make sure that you can actually measure it. And then it's also critical that if you're really going to do strategic planning well, that you link it to your budget. Because if it's not grounded in your finances, it typically doesn't happen. And so if you also link it back to your budget, create goals and objectives, what do you want different departments to achieve? What do you want different staff to achieve? Then you can say, okay, this is a goal or objective that's in our strategic plan. This is something that we want to accomplish within the next so many years, fill in the blank. And then you actually put benchmarks to it and timelines. And you can put that in your budget, and I think that's really critical as well. Because, like I said, if you don't have the dollars attached to it, it's easy to let it sit on a shelf. And a lot of these plans, as you've probably seen with many organizations, you can write these big plans and then they can sit on a shelf and they don't really get implemented. So they have to be realistic. You know, if you say, we want to be the best fill in the blank in the next 2 years or 5 years or whatever, you have to be able to actually achieve that. And so I think that also from an HR perspective, strategic plans are very critical because you can also link your performance evaluations of your staff back to measurable items. Did they achieve something or not? And so strategic planning, I think, is very critical. I think it's something that has to come up from the community in the sense that what does the community want? What are they interested in? And then as the board and as the manager, how do we take all of that information and then how do we put it into bite-sized pieces that we can actually achieve and later measure? So we know how far we've come.
Pete has number 4.
As a township manager, What would be your primary goal for the next year, and how would you accomplish it?
My primary goal. So let me back up if I may. When I first came to Newberry, I talked to my council at length and asked them what were their priorities, what were the things that they wanted. And they were very specific. They had a list of about 5 items. It was fix the budget, review water and sewer rates because there were some significant problems there, establish a recycling program. They wanted someone to revamp and refurbish the Christmas decorations, which had been handmade by local residents in 1957, and they were the original ones. And they had this batch of things that and community blight. They really wanted to focus on community blight. And so those were the priorities that were given to me by the council. And so those were the things that I made significant progress in. And so my comment about that is when you're saying, what do I want to accomplish? I look at my position as what is it that the community has asked for? What is it that the township board has wanted to do? And where do you want to be in the next 1 to 3 to 5 years? And tell me what those items are, and I can make that happen. And I can give you some examples. So when I was at NMU, I wound up as the director, as I told you, program coordinator for the Masters of Public Admin program. That program was slated to be closed in 1 year, and they said, see what you can do with it. Within 2 years down the road, we were 400% enrollment increase. It went from one of the smallest grad programs on campus to the actual largest graduate program at NMU. We had 5 national recognitions, and we were actually able to increase services to students and still cut costs. When I was at Newberry, I was told that we have a budget problem. And it actually wound up being more than even the council realized because they were slated for full-blown bankruptcy within a few months after I got there. And after 2 years, we went from, wow, we're going to be redlining if we write these checks, to a financially stable organization that had redone its chart of accounts, that had gotten new computer equipment, new software. We had written grants. We had completely restructured that organization from top to bottom. And there were 2 deficit elimination plans that were sitting out there that the current council was not aware of when I was hired. There was one from 2012 and one from 2014. And so we were able to then pay off towards the deficit elimination plan to the Department of Treasury and then start putting money away towards revenue bonds. Maintaining and putting away money for reserves. And so when you say, what do you want to do in a year? I would say, tell me what you're interested in, tell me what you want to happen, and give me 2 years, and you will see significant progress. And I don't just say, yeah, I can do it. I've done it. I've done it before, and I've done it with multiple organizations over the course of my career. And so I would say, what does the community want? What does the township board want me to do? And there's a couple of ways, too. A lot of boards like to communicate by email. A lot of them are very involved with, say, a one-on-one. The current board that I had in Newberry, when I first went there, they did not have email addresses, so we got them email addresses. Some of them, one of my council members had never had email before, had never had a computer. And so a lot of the dynamics was one-on-one, coming into the office, visiting, talking about issues, telling, these are the things that are important to us. And so from what do you hope to accomplish, a lot of it in the initial stages is definitely getting to know the township board. what are the things that are critical and important to you, because you all ran for public office for specific reasons. I'm sure you all had things that you wanted to accomplish. And so I would see that my job is, how can I help you achieve the things that you wanted to accomplish when you were elected?
Thank you.
Jennifer, how long did it take you to get Newberry kind of back? Did you say 2 years, or was that reference something else?
It was definitely 2 years before we really started to see true progress. Within the first year, I went in very hopeful that we could do it in a year. It wound up that there was a lot more going on there than the council members even were aware of. And so, for example, there were 27 banking accounts, and that's a lot of banking accounts. And so they were in a position where, like I said, they were going to start bouncing checks. And so the way they were keeping that going is through all those banking accounts. And so I identified that there was a problem with the chart of accounts. It was a locally created chart of accounts, and it didn't match up to the state of Michigan. So we had to revamp the chart of accounts. We identified that the software system that the organization had been using was based in DOS, and it was from 1999. And so it was problematic. And so we wound up also, when I got there, my computer didn't work very well. It would just turn off. The copy machine would work sporadically. The phones didn't work very reliably. So it was one of these situations where we had to kind of go back and do a lot of prep work in order to get where we wanted to go. So, for example, with the software system, the one that we had was Encode. It was a software package put together by Tyler Tech. And when I talked to the folks at Treasury and the folks at Plant Moran, none of them had ever heard of it. And so it wasn't very common. And so we had, like I said, it was in 1999. And so it was an $80,000 package. And we didn't have $80,000. They are a small organization, about $6.3 million budget, and didn't have $80,000. And so then we had to write a grant, and wound up getting that submitted and got the grant money from the Michigan Department of Ag. And so when I say, yes, it took us about 2 years to really kind of turn the tide where we really saw significant progress, it was because we weren't able to just go from A to B. We had so many extra things that we had to do to kind of just get from A to B. There were so many extra steps. And so those were some of the things that we wound up doing. We were able to dramatically cut costs. The organization had not been restructured since about the 1980s. And so one of the things that I really looked at was efficiencies and effectiveness of job tasks. And so one of the things that I've identified over time is that organizations will oftentimes try to innovate and get new equipment or change a little bit over time, but don't ever really go back and revise their job tasks or their job descriptions. So instead of taking stuff away, a lot of times organizations will continuously add. So Newberry's situation was, for example, they had been doing that. They had paper versions and computer versions, and just to get staff paid, the same information went through 6 iterations. And 4 of them were paper-based. And so you were changing, transcribing information from one paper system to another paper system. And so we were able to, when we got the software, dramatically cut the time that it took to process payroll. And so that was one example of many that we were able to initiate, and because of that, our billing department went from 2.5 individuals to 1. But we did not lay anyone off. No one was fired. We were able to reposition staff in other parts of the organization, because a lot of times what you will see is organizations sometimes will be overstaffed or have more resources in one area and understaffed and maybe underutilized in others. And so one of the things we were able to do was make things a lot more even so that the departments that needed the resources were able to get them. And then that all has a cascade effect where, from an HR perspective, you know, if you're able to change positions, you can change your insurance rates, you can change all of the MERS, all of the pieces that go along with that. So it was quite an involved process. You know, we had a great team of people. And that was one of the things, too, that I wound up doing, is really bringing on additional staff that had excellent skill sets, because no one can do it by themselves. It's always a group effort. It's always a team in any organization. And I was very pleased to be able to bring in some staff that had additional skill sets that the organization needed. And so that was one of the other ways that we were able to sort of change the dynamics over that 2 years. And I'm that person that I jump out there because I have a government background. I contact the state agencies, and we were able to work with the Department of Treasury very closely. We were able to work with MEDC very closely, and through these contacts and relationships, we were able to get extra grants, and we were able to get additional expertise and professional assistance from these state agencies, which helped us tremendously as well. So I had hoped it would have been a quicker thing, but it wasn't.
I'm curious what you did the first day. Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, if you want to take a break. 'Cause
Very first day I got there, I asked for an organization chart. One had never been created in the entire time of the organization that we could determine. So I really wanted to know what's the org chart. I wanted job descriptions. I asked for job descriptions, because my opinion is that when you manage an organization, it's really important to understand who are the staff, what are their positions, what are the things that they are required to do on a daily basis, and then go from there. One of the things I always do when I first start a new position is to identify who are the key stakeholders. Who are those individuals within the community? Who are the individuals at the state level, professional associations, whatever those stakeholders may be, whether it's civic, business leaders, oftentimes religious leaders as well in small communities. Who are these people? And get to know them. So I'm the person that I will pick up the phone and say, hello, my name is, can I come and meet you? You know, I mean, it's great to have electronic communication, but I think that having a communications background, we don't want to forget that oftentimes still it's good to shake someone's hand, sit in front of them, you have a name and a face, and get to know them. And so the first few months that I was in Newberry, I spent a tremendous amount of time getting out into the community, meeting the business owners and the individuals that had been in that community for a really long time. Had been born and raised there for decades and generations, and I think that's important as well, because there's an organizational history that goes along, and there's also a community history, and understanding that dynamic, I think, is very critical to success. And so that's something that I always find is very helpful, is getting out there in the community, introducing myself. If there is a board member, like when I was in Newberry, one of the board members took it upon himself to introduce me to local individuals, which was extremely helpful. Another thing that I did when I got there was spend a tremendous amount of time with each of the board members and try to understand, like I said, what are the issues that are important and critical to each of the board members, and whether it was sitting in the office, whether it was sitting on their front porch drinking iced tea. These are very small communities, and so very formal, manner of government doesn't necessarily work in some communities. Marquette is a little bit more formal than Newberry just because it's a little bit bigger. But it was definitely important to me to spend a lot of time with my board members. And in fact, I felt like that was probably one of the key things that I did the most. I've always said, no matter what position I'm in, anyone that is considered my supervisor should know what I'm doing at all times, because I would never want any of my supervisors, whether it's a board or an individual, to hear something that I'm doing from someone else, because that's not where anyone wants to be. So if I'm going to meet with someone, if I am interested in information, I am very diligent about communicating that to the board and the groups that I have worked with in the past, because you should absolutely know where I am and what I'm doing. You should never have to hear about that from anyone else. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks. I go back to Newberry because it's so similar to what we do here. You know, that's our best frame of reference, more so really than the education part, but that's a good background. Any follow-up? Pete?
Under recreation, you see your, excuse me, under recreation and all your changes, and, you know, do this and that. Did you make any changes in your artificial ice?
Oh, the artificial ice. Okay, well, there were really no changes to be made in the sense that Newberry spent, I want to say it was about $200,000 on artificial ice, and it is stacked up in a storage room and has been for several years. And so there was a grant that, am I speaking to what you're talking about with the hockey
Yes.
arena and the artificial ice? Okay, just make sure I was going in the right direction.
Right.
So years ago, there was a grant there were two grants actually, one through the DNR and one through the DEQ. Actually, I should say Eagle now, right? I'm still having trouble with that one. And there was a park that the Village of Newberry wanted to expand. It was a brownfield, and so they revamped it. And so these grants were for revamping an old brownfield and to put in a hockey arena was the original concept. And so one of the things that they wound up doing is they identified that natural ice was going to be too expensive to maintain given the resources that the community had. So they wanted to be very progressive at that time, and they jumped out and they purchased the Sin Ice, is the way we kind of refer to it in town, Sin Ice, the artificial ice. And it looks like big white plastic plexiboard sheets, if you've never seen it. Maybe you have. And so they purchased all of this in the hopes that they would be able to put in a hockey arena. Unfortunately, the resources and the infrastructure was so much more expensive than what they had originally thought. So the backfill, bringing in all the extra dirt, taking out all the yucky dirt and bringing in better dirt, doing all of the asphalt, they did dikes and berms all around the area. All of that wound up being significantly more expensive. And so unfortunately, there was never a building that was built. And so when I got there, there was a lot of dirt and berms. And so since I have been there, we were able to actually close out that grant, both of those grants this past summer. But at this point, there's dirt. There are two sections of playground, one for children and one a challenge course. If you're familiar with sort of the extreme challenge courses that people are getting into, I decided that I thought that would be something really unique, and they decided to do that with us. So unfortunately, the Sin Ice has never been utilized. It's still sitting there in a big pile.
Thank you.
which is truly unfortunate because there wasn't the money to actually build a building to use it on. They have used it, well, I should say, they've used it some on, in the building called the Barn, if you're familiar with the Barn. And if you've ever been over there, it truly is a repurposed barn. And you can see the daylight through the building and through the walls. And so they have used it some over there, but they've had a lot of trouble with it because the concrete expands and contracts, and so that has caused the sun ice to break. What the sun ice that they actually used there at the barn. So, like I said, the bulk of it is sitting in big piles.
Thank you very much.
Any other follow-up? Okay. Dan has number 5.
Thank you for being here this morning. Realizing that our residents are our stockholders, how would you work with them to keep them informed, educated, and to get their input?
So from a communications perspective, I think it, like you say, it's very important to keep your community up to date. Like I mentioned, I do have a background in communications, and I was previously a public information officer, so it was my job on a daily basis to try to go on the news, and I have done that quite a bit. So that's one way, of course. But when I went to Newberry, I understood that this was a very important feature, and up until that point, there hadn't been a lot of back and forth between the manager and the community. So I took on weekly radio shows, and there were 2 radio stations in town at the time, and so I would do them back to back. And so that was one thing, and it was just a talk with the manager type of every single week. I would go in and talk about what are we doing in public works. This week we're picking up leaves, we're doing recycling, you know, all of the things that are going on. And it was actually quite a good kickstart, jumpstart for the community understanding what some of the things were that we were doing. I've also done quite a bit of mailing, just basic paper mail. I think in a lot of ways you have to understand the community. Newberry is an older community, and so while we did really kind of jump off our Facebook page, and really we did a lot on the electronic side with the website and the Facebook, there's still a tremendous amount, or still a tremendous number of individuals in that community that are not as comfortable or enjoy receiving their information from an electronic source. And so we actually have done quite a bit of mailing. We do utility billing every month and send out about 2,300 pieces of mail every month. So there's about 1,500 customers, and like I mentioned, Newberry has water, sewer, electric, garbage. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is put in some what you think of as maybe newsletter type of updates into that utility billing. We also put a whole section on the bill that has community announcements, and that has been very well received because people have a tendency to pay attention to their utility bill. And so right there on the front page, we took a whole block. Previously, the utility bills had been postcards, and they had been being printed in the office. And so one of the things that we did was completely revamp the way that we were doing billing, which allowed us to actually put newsletter and other information into a mailing, and we contracted that out to a third party who actually prints it, stuffs it, prints it, folds it, stuffs it, puts a postage on it, and sends it out in the mail. And we were able to do that with those 2,300 pieces of mail and cut costs. So that was one of the ways that we were able to communicate with the community as well. Also, when I got there, the website was older, and it didn't have very much information on it. And so one of the things that we did was we went back and down into the basement of the Village of Newberry. There's 2 big buildings over there, and there's a lot of basement space, and there are documents going back to the 1800s, and there's some amazing stuff in that basement. And we started scanning all of that. Quite honestly, we just started scanning it and said, hey, people should be able to access information and not have to put in a FOIA request. Up until when I got there, board packets, agendas, all of that information was not on the website. Somebody would have had to have submitted a FOIA request. And so just from a basic governance transparency perspective, we really felt like it was important to have allow the community access. And so we started putting everything on the website. Completely revamped the website, went with a company called Revise. Maybe you're familiar with them. And we redid it. Also, we went a long way towards being ADA compliant, because we always have to remember that we have a lot of individuals in our community that, you know, have a different mode of communication. And so that was something else that was very important. The other issue is, before I got there, council meetings were not broadcast. And so we worked with the local radio station. We looked at doing it ourselves, actually videotaping it and doing it ourselves, but wound up ultimately partnering with one of the local radio stations, and they actually broadcast, so they would tape it and then broadcast it. And so that's something else that we were able to do. And so before I got there, there was not a lot of easy access to information without submitting a FOIA request. And so during the time that I've been there, we've revamped the website, put all kinds of information, all of our ordinances, like I said, all of our meeting minutes, board packets. We were getting back into the 80s. We have them going back into the 1900s, early 1900s. But those are some of the things that we've wound up doing over the last, let's see, 2.5 or more years.
Thank you.
Any follow-up on that? Okay. Question 6 is Randy's.
Thank you for coming, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Based on your current knowledge of Marquette Township, do you see any changes you would recommend in your first year as township manager?
Changes. Well, I definitely want to compliment the organization. When you've been in an organization that has struggled, as I have, it's easy to start to recognize ones that are functioning quite well. And so I have looked through your budgets, through your audits. Some of the things that I would look at, not necessarily change, but just find out more information, is more detail in your budget. So when I go through your budget and I read your audit, there is, it appears to be more aggregate, sort of broad categories. And so as someone that's not familiar with absolutely everything that you do, I would be interested in seeing more detail. So when I was looking at it, it was a little bit difficult to determine maybe what your professional services were that you were contracting out. That's also something that I am very interested in looking at, is anytime you have an organization, what are the services that you are contracting out? What are the ones that you are keeping in-house? And are there ways to save money? Sometimes it's better to keep them in-house. Sometimes it's better to contract them out. But the thing is, if you do contract them out, you have to maintain that supervision. So one of the things that we wound up with in Newberry was they had contracted out for their superintendent for the wastewater treatment plant. And that was getting extremely expensive. And so we were actually able to bring that position back in-house and hire a staff person. And because we had full-time supervision at the plant, it actually reduced costs, even though the salary was more than the contracting, because we were not having the maintenance problems and we were not having the other problems with releases. There were some concerns about releases into the Tequamanon, and because there was a full-time supervisor there on site, that we were able to change that over. Could you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah.
Make sure I got all the parts of it.
Yeah, it says, your current knowledge of Marquette Township, do you see any changes you would recommend in your first year as a township manager?
So, like I said, definitely looking at job descriptions. What are staff doing? Looking at, are there ways to be more efficient? Looking at, are there ways to cut costs? When I've been in Newberry, I wound up jumping in and within the first year had to go through union negotiations. And so that was not a situation that I had experienced before, is being in charge of union negotiations. And so by going through that process, we were actually able to increase salaries by 6% over a 3-year period, 321%. And actually reduce our liability by $322,000 over that same time period. And we really looked at, like I said, monitoring the budget, a lot more detail, because what I experienced was you can really look at your expenses so much better if you have a little bit more detail in your budget, because then you can determine, do you have areas where maybe you're spending more on maintenance than you should, and maybe it's time to actually go ahead and buy that new piece of equipment? Or maybe the, some of the things that are happening in your organization, what are you doing with, different tasks, and can you contract those out? So those are things that I would definitely want to look into. Another thing that kind of caught my attention was your expenses for legal seemed a little high to me, actually quite a bit high for what I would have expected for an organization of this nature. So I would want to know a lot more detail about what's going on there. I didn't see a lot of detail about the audit as far as how much that costs. So these are just things that kind of come to mind that I would want to know. And I'm not saying there's anything going on or wrong or anything like that. I just would want to know more information in detail. I also saw that you're looking at maybe restructuring your public works. So that's absolutely something I have quite a bit of experience with. In Newberry, we did a full restructuring and completely revamped the entire organization from top to bottom. And so it was a really good process and experience, and so that's something that I would be able to assist with if you're still in the process of doing that.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Any follow-up? I'm guessing that some of our legal is that we have our attorney present at all of our board meetings. So
Okay.
that's twice a month. That started when we were all new board members for the most part, going through a lot of transitional things. And we've questioned ourselves a few times, do we want to continue that? And the attorney doesn't really care either way, except that it makes his job easier when we come to him afterward. If he didn't have that legacy knowledge, it would be more difficult for him and still may end up costing us more in the long run.
And that makes
So that's kind
sense,
of a-
absolutely. It's
it's
just
kind
one of
of a
those things that,
juggling.
you're kind of reading through and I'm going,
Yeah.
what's going on there?
Yeah. So it's not really any, litigation or anything like that. I would guess that that's the majority of it.
Makes sense.
Okay, question 7 is Dave's.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And then if you could tag on to the end of that, where do you see the township in 5 years?
So me as a professional, I definitely would like to be back in Marquette. As I mentioned before, I am a former resident, and I really enjoyed my time here. I think that Marquette is sort of the greater region. I'll speak of it as more of the greater region. The township, as well as the whole area, is a very innovative community, and I think that it's a place that I really enjoyed living. My husband is a faculty member at NMU. He's a former dean of the College of Professional Studies and Health Sciences. And so it would be good for us on a very personal level to be back in Marquette. And so from that perspective, I would still like to be here. Professionally, I am in a position where I have done a lot of different types of jobs, and I think that I'm now to the point where being a manager is one of those that really coalesces so many of the experiences that I've had in the past, whether it's budgeting, whether it's lobbying, grant writing, dealing with fire departments, law enforcement, economic development. I'm a former director of an economic development council. That's not something I think we touched on much. When I was in Newberry, we started the first planning commission and also did the first master plan. The community was incorporated in the late 1800s and had never had a master plan. And so from a professional perspective, you know, I'm always looking for what's the next thing that we want to take on. And if you give me a list of goals, then we'll make a good dent at it within a few years. There's no doubt about it. As an organization, I think that there's really some challenges that have been looming from the state perspective, whether it's revenue sharing and the loss thereof to local governmental entities over a very extended period of time. Also, the dark store issue with the big boxes, you know, really getting involved from a lobby perspective. I think that's something that I could assist with, but there's no doubt that that's something that, in my opinion, if the townships and all of the other entities, and Marquette's done a really good job, I think, just as a region, really pushing that issue at the state level, but continuing to lobby that issue and trying to get some relief, because over time, those additional tax dollars will really pay off. But I would also say, as an organization, you know, I think it's really good to work with any new business, any new entity that's wanting to come in, and how can we work together in advance. I think that your current manager made some very good comments about working with Walmart in advance, and then they were one of the, I think the only maybe, that didn't try to go back and get their taxes reduced. And so I would definitely want to continue that effort. Or as the organization, I would definitely say, what's your capital improvement plan? I did look at one of the ones that was online. It looked like it was a few years old. It looks like you've got a strategic plan that the last version that I was able to see was in 2013. So typically you would think every 5 years. A recreation plan. It's very obvious that the township has done tremendous work towards moving their goals and objectives forward from the recreation perspective and the parks. That looks like it might need to be updated. It looks like you're interested in maybe doing some restructuring. And I would also want to look at, where do you want to go with your capital improvements? Asset management. These are things that Newberry had never had before I was there. And so now they do have a capital improvements plan, and we have been working on asset management. We also have some big issues that are coming from the state with the lead and copper concerns, and with the water and sewer entities, you're going to be affected by that. And so I would be very interested to know, you know, where you're going and sort of what you've done so far. And so these are some things that I would say from just a very personal perspective. Marquette is a community that I would really like to be in for a long period of time. And I think, like I said, it's important that the person fit the community, because if they don't, it doesn't matter what kind of skill sets they have, they're not going to want to stay. And so there's a huge amount of flux and and sort of upheaval that organizations go through when they have a change in leadership. And so having somebody that really wants to stay in the area, I think, is critical. And then from an organizational perspective, I would really want to continue a lot of the great work that's already been done, and then touch on some of the other things that I mentioned. Reviewing a strategic plan, reviewing recreation plan, looking at restructuring, looking at, are there ways to link the strategic plan back to the budgeting and performance evals for your staff. Maybe you're doing that already, but it's just not something that I can see, through the documents that are online. And also putting all of the ordinances together online would be helpful. I did notice that they were compartmentalized, and so there were different sections, and so I wasn't quite able to see all of them. But those are some of the things that over the next several years I would want to work on. Also, too, I think it's really critical to think about succession planning. And any organization that is, we've just got such a huge number of individuals that are in retirement age now, and looking at succession planning is also very critical. And that's something that we worked on, cross-training for small organizations. When I came to Newberry, there was no cross-training. We're now 3 deep in the utility department, whereas before, if someone was out and sick, all billing stopped, everything stopped. Succession planning has been a really key component for us, particularly with the linemen and with wastewater. And so that's something that we worked on very much. We have wound up hiring a superintendent for wastewater, and that has worked out wonderful. And we have also moved staff and paid for their education to get a wastewater license. And so if you're familiar with some of the comments, Newberry has gone from what Tom Asmus at DEQ used to tease me about being one of the worst wastewater plants in the UP or in the state. And this past summer, one of our staff, who we wound up putting in from a succession planning perspective, moved in from Public Works over to wastewater and paid for all of his licensing. Fast forward a little over 2 years, he won a state award for basically the wastewater treatment operator of the year. And so those are other things that we've been able to do. And so I think that it's important on the personal management. What is someone's personal management philosophy? And there are things that I say a lot when I'm working with my organizations. For example, one of the things I say a lot is, I don't want everyone to know what I know. I want other people to have other information other than what I have. I say staff safety is absolutely critical. I talk about efficiency and effectiveness, and what are the things that we're doing. Are we doing it because we've always done it that way, or are we doing it because it's effective and efficient? I always talk about plan your work and work your plan, because that's obviously something very important and critical. And so these are some of the things that are important to me as a professional, and so these are things that I would bring forward. And I do think that someone's management philosophy really does have a tendency to lead where the organization is going to go next.
Thank you.
Any follow-up to that? That was very comprehensive. In my business, when I do interviews, I usually tell the applicant about the organization first, and I purposely didn't do that because we can always answer questions about that later, and we wanted to spend your time knowing about you and what you knew. But just to comment on everything you said you would look at, we're doing. So
That's
to
fantastic.
put you at ease, I think every specific thing, we've talked about all of that stuff. We haven't finished it or acted on some of it, but we're in the process.
That's
I already
wonderful.
told them, strategic planning, January, be ready. Okay, so our last question is, why should we hire you?
Well, I think for a lot of the reasons that I've already mentioned, from a personal perspective, I think I'm a really good fit for the organization. From a professional perspective, I think that I have skill sets that I can bring to the table that are really critical for a government entity, particularly anyone that is a little bit smaller. You know, smaller communities, there's an economy of scale issue, and one of the things that you see in smaller communities, in my opinion, is you have to be, I truly believe, a little bit more innovative, and you have to be able to solve problems with fewer staff, because you just don't have the tax dollars or the revenues to be able to fund everything that you want. And so it's not that you don't still have to provide all those services, it's that you have to figure out how do you provide those services and do it in a way that the organization can still afford. And so, as I shared with you, a lot of the things that I was able to do while I was in Newberry was pretty much completely revamp that organization from top to bottom through restructuring, through new software, new equipment, union contract negotiations. You know, we were able to do a lot of changes that really brought about financial benefits to the organization. And so these are things that I bring to the table, the things that are similar: understanding budgeting, understanding enterprise funds, understanding water, wastewater, fire. These are not easy departments to manage necessarily. There is a lot of rules and procedures that go along with them, and having got the been there, done that experience, I think is really helpful. I've gone through water and sewer rate studies. That's always critical. As I mentioned, Newberry had about $11 million worth of debt that they had taken on through water and sewer bonds in 2014, and then soon thereafter lowered their utility rates, which did not create the problem, but it exacerbated it significantly, which meant they were going to go bankrupt quicker than they would have. So understanding how to do a water and sewer rate study, that's something that I think I would be able to bring to the table. There's huge learning curves on a lot of these things in government, and even though I had been at the state level of government, I had taught all types of different classes in government management, there definitely is a difference when you actually do it yourself. And so these are things that I think are very critical to bring to the table. As I mentioned, lobbying, grant writing. The largest grant I've ever written and received was $600,000. So I do have experience with that, and I don't know any organization that would want to turn that down. As I mentioned too, management philosophy, I think it's really critical to be open with your staff. I'm the one that always says it's worth asking the question. And I am the kind of person that I like to collaborate. I like to brainstorm ideas. I like to think out loud. And so I think when staff know that you're truly interested in what they think and what they want, and say, hey, is it equipment? Is it a process or a procedure? Is it flexibility in time? What are the things that make a staff person's life easier and better? Because if your staff are happy, they do not have as many sick days, they do better, and I think your community ultimately does better as well. So why should you hire me? I think for a lot of the things that I have mentioned in the past, I have a very strong track record that if you give me a set of goals and objectives, I will make a huge dent in them within a reasonable amount of time. And so I think that's critical. And so you have that. Also, communications experience. I have quite a bit of experience, like I said, being on TV, doing interviews, working in crisis communication issues, If there is an emergency management issue, I have been in the past the public information officer for the incident, and understanding incident command, I think, is critical for a manager. And so these are a lot of areas that not everybody would have the entire composite. Also, economic development. I was the first faculty member in the state of Michigan to teach a class in placemaking at the graduate level. I have a very strong belief in placemaking and how it relates to sustainability and planning and growth development for organizations. And, you know, back in the 70s, we all kind of thought, wow, you know, let's put in a strip mall and that's fantastic and wonderful. And then we decided, no, that's really not what we want. People want walkability, they want trees, they want landscape. There's a lot of these things that I think over the last several decades in my lifetime that there's been a huge shift in the way that communities are planned and developed. And so I have a very strong knowledge of placemaking and some of the things that go along with that. And so these are aspects that you don't have to teach me. I understand what's going on. And so I think at the end of it all, I would say that my learning curve would be, I think, significantly less than it might be for some, just because I have a lot of been there, done that experience. And I think that's very helpful in any organization that you're with. There's a solid 1 year time frame because you have to go through pretty much everything at least once to kind of understand what it all is happening. And then by that second year, you've kind of like, hey, I've done it once before and I'm not doing it for the first time. And so I think it's typically a solid year for any individual in any position to really understand the organization well, understand the stakeholders, understand what are the things that drive that organization. And so I have a strong track record of getting in there and reaching out to the community, because I think it's also important for your manager to be that face, to be that person that if you run into someone in the grocery store and you're standing there in front of the bananas, and somebody wants to come up and talk to you, that you can do that. And I've had a lot of experiences with other managers tell me they do not engage with residents when they are outside their job. And that's not the way I handle things. If somebody wants to talk to me and I'm in the school pickup line, or if somebody wants to talk to me and I'm at a local football game, or I'm in the grocery store, or wherever I might be, I'm willing to have those conversations. And I think it's just part of the job. And understanding that these jobs are not 8 to 5. They are pretty much a 24/7, you're pretty much always on call, and understanding that dynamic. And if you haven't experienced it before, it can be a bit of a shock to realize that you're pretty much always working. It's pretty much a 24/7 job. And so I do understand that dynamic and appreciate that. And so I would ask that you consider my experience and the things that I have done in the past and the successes that I have been able to create with a wonderful team of individuals at all of the organizations that I have been with. Another thing I would like to share is I feel very, very fortunate that over my career, my immediate supervisors are those that I call very, very close friends, and very much people that I interact with even when I'm not working at those organizations any longer. And I think that really speaks to my personality. I'm the one that's like, hey, what's going on with your life? What's going on with everything? Because it's not just about work. All of this is totally about relationships, and I believe that very strongly. And so I feel very, very fortunate that the individuals that I have worked with in the past, I consider some of my very best friends. And so I appreciate their their involvement in my life and mine and theirs, and I would hope that you would allow me that opportunity to get to know each of you better and to have those lasting relationships as well as we move forward through the next several years.
Thank you. We're running a little long, and we have a 1 o'clock person coming in, and we're going to need a break, so I don't want to cut anybody off by any means. The one thing I wanted to say is that the board has received all of the reference questions that I did on all of your backgrounds, and they're aware of the answers and the questions. I didn't know if there were any follow-ups on that anybody wanted to ask something quickly, or I'd like to tell you about the township a little bit, and maybe the board can chime in. I know somebody that would love you to death would be our planning chair, Mike Springer, because he knows Mark Wyckoff, and I'm sure the whole placemaking and smart growth and all of the trails and stuff is important to him. So that's very important to the township too. We've gone through a lot of that. The board has, they've pretty much gotten everything that I've worked on with backgrounds. Your references are absolutely glowing.
Thank you.
Everyone is just thrilled to support you as far as they understand this position. I don't know does anybody else want to ask anything else, or?
Well done.
Well, you can ask us questions too, but I wanted to give the board a chance in case there was something that, wasn't covered or wasn't asked. Anything we want to share with her about the township? We've pretty much either done everything you've talked about or in the process of it with your experience. Ernie?
I think she's brought up in that. She's done her research, so she has a good background of where we've been, what we're doing, and maybe what we're hope to do in the future and that. But she did her research, which to me, I've interviewed a lot of people, and most of them do very little background information. So I have to compliment her on that. She did her background check.
Thank you.
Anything else? So what would you like to ask us? Briefly, if you can. I don't want to put you under a poll, but just so we can kind of get a break.
At this point, I don't have any questions, but I do want to reiterate and thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for your willingness to review my credentials in person. And I hope that I will have some additional conversations with you in the next coming days or weeks, and that I would really like to be your next township manager. And like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to present my credentials to you in person.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Okay.
Is that all?
You are excused then.
Thank you.
You have to recess it.
Yeah. 12:25, we can recess. Yeah.
Right over the door.
Now we're good? Okay. All right, our second candidate is Ron Yesney. And I'm trying to decide how much of what I said this morning I need to go through again. We are recording. It'll be taped, audio and visual for YouTube. Our meetings are on, so everybody can see it. We can go back and look at it for reference if we need to. The plan is to kind of have 10 minutes or so to have you tell us about yourself. And we have 7 or 8 questions, maybe 10 minutes apiece, roughly, for answers. And then at the end, 10, 15 minutes to ask us questions if you have any. Typically in an interview, if I were interviewing for the hotel, I would tell the candidate about the business, but I'm not going to do that here. I want you to, we want to listen to you first and see what you know and what you don't know and what you want to present. And we can answer questions after, if you like. I forgot to tell the first candidate that we are not making a decision today. We will schedule a special meeting to do the deliberating. And We're also going to talk about the manager's contract at that deliberation, to see if it's the same, what we want to change or not from what we're using right now. So,
All right.
tell us about yourself, Ron,
Okay, I wrote this down.
whatever you want to share.
Before I do that, I
Sure.
just had a couple questions.
Yes.
So overall then, what is the amount of time allotted? I want to make sure that I stay within that time.
Roughly an hour.
Roughly 1
Hour
hour.
15. We went over a little bit this morning because we started a little bit later, too.
Okay.
And Ron, if you could get the microphone just a little closer, that'd be perfect. Yeah.
I
Yeah, that one
certainly
you pretty
can.
much have
Yeah.
to have right
Typically
next to
have
you.
Is it on? Can you hear me okay?
You're
All right.
good right there, yeah.
So what I hear you saying then is about 10 minutes just as introduce myself to the
Yep,
board.
whatever you wanna share.
Share my thoughts and my ideas and considerations. Then you guys have 8 general questions that you were going to ask.
Yep, and about 5 minutes or so for each question.
Okay.
It gives us about an hour, 10 or so minutes at the end, then if you have questions for us, or if we have anything else to follow up, or if we want to talk about the township.
Okay.
Because we do have an hour in between, between you and the next candidate, so we've got some flexibility.
All right, that helps me. I know in interviewing individuals myself, sometimes when people go on and on and on, and it really helps me to know what type of time frame I have to work with and the parameters of the interview. So that's really what I wanted to get out
And
first
we-
half.
I don't want to cut you off either, so that you can finish your thought, or, so it's not going to be that stringent.
No, okay. I guess I'll just start out. The first thing I heard you say is you wanted to hear a little bit about myself, and then maybe secondary to that, what I know about the township or what my
Sure.
interest might be in this position.
Yep, how they fit.
Okay, so personally, I'm from the Upper Peninsula. I was born in Ishpeming. My dad worked at the Republic Mine. He worked there until that place closed, and we moved downstate. So I actually grew up in northern Lower Michigan. Graduated there. Graduated from Central Michigan University. Upon graduating, I came back to Marquette. I got a job in Marquette, and then I went to grad school at Northern Michigan University, and I worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service at that time, and I kind of worked myself through grad school. After that, looking for work, I ended up working as a community economic development educator. Took a job in Wisconsin. I wanted to stay in the UP, but at that point in my life, in my 20s, I realized I was probably going to have to leave, get some experience in order to be able to come back and make a living here. So that's what I did. So in that role, I was part of what at that time was called Community Natural Resources and Economic Development. So I worked as a mostly in community development. I did a lot of meeting facilitation. I did a lot of education for local municipalities, small governments, nonprofit organizations. Basically facilitated a lot of meetings and tried to help organizations, businesses, and communities prosper and thrive. It was a very interesting job. I loved it. The difficulty with it is that with those extension positions, a lot of those positions have faded away because they were partially funded by the USDA. They were partially funded by the counties in which the position was located, and they were partially funded by the university. And what ended up happening with me is that with the three-legged stools, they called it, there was always at least one entity that had different ideas than the other entity. It's hard to work for 3 boards. So after 6 years there, I either had to apply for tenure and go through the tenure process, which I strongly considered, or I had to, think if there was something else I wanted to do. And that's when I started looking for work. And I ended up in the Upper Peninsula. I ended up coming on to the Department of Natural Resources in 2003 as a recreational specialist at that time. So I was working primarily in trails and campgrounds. Now a lot evolved since then. Originally when I started, the DNR wasn't nearly as focused on recreation, tourism, and economic development as they are today. And I'd like to say that I had a role in making that transition happen. when I first started, they actually had the trails and the recreation program housed within Forest Recreation Division. So you were part-time firefighter, part-time timber harvest person, and then throwing a little trails and recreation on the side. And that was never my focus. And my focus was on promoting recreation, tourism, trails, and economic development. And I was able to grow that and spirit that. And through measures within the department, you know, sometimes it's hard to make changes to an organization from the bottom up, but sometimes it is possible if you do it incrementally and you do it tactfully and you bring things to the right people and you have success, you can grow a program. And that's what I was able to do. I was able to grow from a recreation specialist into a trail specialist into a trails coordinator. And now I'm the trails coordinator for the Upper Peninsula. I've got 6 staff people that work under me, and I'm responsible for all the trails in the Upper Peninsula. So I went from being just the West UP recreation person, do everything, to a trails coordinator. So how does a trails coordinator relate to a township manager's position? Well, a lot of what trails aren't just trails. Trails don't just exist. They're managed, they're maintained, they're facilitated. There's a lot of landowner negotiations that go into play, and there's a lot of conflicts that go along with trails. There's conflicts that go along with trails in terms of the different user groups. They don't always get along. There's a lot of private landowner negotiations that need to go on, because in order to have an interconnected trail system, you have to have interconnectivity. In order to sustain that interconnectivity, you have to work with people, you have to work with landowners, you have to work with municipal organizations, and you got to get people all on the same page, working together and having a vision for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So trails are, you know, being a trails coordinator, you might think, well, he's just out, you know, wandering around in the woods looking at deadfall trees and, you know, cutting some slash. And that's not the case. I cover the entire Upper Peninsula. I do a lot of work in the Lower Peninsula as well. And a lot of it is really heartfelt negotiations, working in committees, working with teams, empowering others, finding communities that have opportunities for trail development and helping them make the best of what they have. And then secondary to that is the whole economic development component, because with trails, whether it be motorized trails or non-motorized trails, as we're seeing, especially in northern Michigan, there's a lot of economic development opportunity that goes with these trails. You know, you can use Copper Harbor, for example, where, you know, they've become a trail mecca of sorts. A lot of the work I've done in Gogebic County now, where they've developed an outstanding stretch of Iron Bell Trail that's bringing them nationwide recognition. A lot of the work that I did early on and continue to do for many years were the Iron Ore Heritage Trail here in Marquette County, which has become a destination trail, and that required, and in the development of the Recreation Authority, all of that, that required a lot of working together, negotiations, cooperations, and work of that sort. And as far as me and what I bring to the table and what I could do for Marquette Township, you know, I do think that's my strongest suit, is that I'm pretty, I'm calm, I'm level-headed, I find ways to get things done. I'm tenacious, but I'm not headstrong to the point where I can't see things from others' perspectives. So over the years, working for the state government, federal government, I've run my own business. I kind of have a pretty acute ability to kind of read what people might be thinking or feeling, and trying to gather buy-in and then move forward from there. And where I'm at right now with the department, and which kind of leads me here, is that I'm sort of topped out. I've taken my position as high as I can within the Department of Natural Resources. There's nowhere else for me to go to aspire to. I've been there for 16 and a half years. I don't need to leave. I don't have to leave. I just feel like I've got about at least 10 working years left, and I'm looking for maybe a new opportunity, a new exploration, if you will. And in order for me to promote or do anything new within the Department of Natural Resources, I would have to move to Lansing. And I've considered that, but I'm just not sure that that's the best move for me as an individual in terms of my hobbies, my interests, what I like to do, and where my passions are. So because of that, I started looking for, maybe other opportunities that would be more local, where I could, use the knowledge, skills, and abilities that I've attained so far in my working and personal career and be able to apply those. And when I saw the Marquette Township position arise, I thought, well, it could be a good opportunity for me to use the skills that I have and working relationships I have in the community, because I do believe I have those to bring to the table as well. I wouldn't have to move very far anyway, and I could still, work the next 10 years of my life doing something I love. So that's kind of where I've been, what's brought me here today, and why I'm before you. I've talked a little bit about some of my knowledge, skills, and abilities, but I'm certain we can get into those more in the questions. And then as far as Marquette Township, I know, I've read the master plan. I've read the rec plan. I'm also worked with the township on several trail-related projects over the years. I see what's happening in Marquette Township. I see that the amount of commercial business and some residential development that's going on, and I can see that there's a lot at stake here as the community continues to grow. You have transportation corridors to consider. You have livability issues to consider, affordability issues to consider. You have jobs that have to be created. So really interested in being a part of the future of Marquette Township, and maybe lending my craft, if you will, my way of doing things to that venture, to that next 10 years or so. So really interested in what you have going on here. I think there's a lot of opportunity. It's obviously a growing township. I think it's well managed. I think it's well run. I'm just interested in being a part of it.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions on what I've thrown out there so far? Anything I missed?
Not so far, no. Okay, the first question is John's.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here, John.
The question I have for you is, describe your understanding of charter township government and the differences from general law government, if you can.
To be very frank with you, my experience has been in state government, federal government, and when I have worked with local governments as a community development economic educator, it's been with regard to strategic planning, land use planning, and business development. I have not worked a lot in the field of charter township law, or the laws and how they differ between a charter township or a general law government. So I'm going to be very frank with you. I've not spent a lot of time working with charter township law. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep, that's okay.
I'm certain, I'll follow it up by saying it's well within my my knowledge base that I could pick that up pretty quickly, and all I would have to do is study it and find somebody to learn from, and I'm very sure that I would be able to adequately address issues like that as they arose.
Thanks again.
Any follow-up from anybody? Okay. Next question is mine. The board has adopted policy governance. Describe your understanding of it and how the manager position relates to the board. And we can repeat these the questions to Ron anytime.
Yeah, if you could repeat that one
Sure.
for me, please, Lynn.
The board has adopted policy governance. Describe your understanding of it and how the manager position relates to the board. We don't want you to pass out anyway.
So describe my understanding of policy government and how the manager relates to the board.
Right.
Policy governance in my mind is that the township manager has a set of policies and rules and basically sideboards to work within. That individual has those certain latitudes within those policies to make daily decisions that impact the daily interactions of the township, and a lot of that is outlined within that policy. And so the day-to-day operations of the township are the responsibility of the manager, and a lot of those decisions can be made independently. However, when there's when you get outside of those general policies and that policy governance, there's more major decisions that need to be made. There's decisions that need to be made as they relate to the future of the township or personnel matters or things of a grander nature. And at that time, those are the things that the township manager needs to bring to the board, reports to the board, and the board basically at that time advises, or the manager might come in with some recommendations to the board, but the board would eventually make those decisions, and it's up to that manager to bring the decisions forth or carry out the wishes of the board as is decided in meetings.
Okay. Any follow-up to that? Okay, good. Next question's Ernie's.
Thank you for being here this afternoon.
We're used to evening meetings.
We're used to evening meetings. Okay.
Just glad to be here.
Describe the process you would follow to establish a strategic plan for the township.
I think in order to develop an effective strategic plan, there has to be internal and external. In other words, there are professional organizations that will come in and do a strategic plan for a township or any organization, and that, from what I've seen, those consultants that come in and do strategic plans kind of have a cookie cutter approach, and that you're gonna get from that strategic plan. If you were to hire a consultant to come in and do your strategic plan, for example, and you're not intimately involved in that, you're gonna get a strategic plan that's very much like a strategic plan from any other township or municipality nearby. So I think it is crucial. I think to do a complete strategic plan, and to do it thoroughly, you do need outside help. But you also, the township manager, as well as the board, as well as the public, need to be intimately involved in that strategic plan. So I've seen strategic plans that are very well done, but those are plans that are done, they take longer, they have more public input sessions, there's more involvement from the staff, and it's an incremental process versus just hiring somebody to take the whole thing over and do it for you, which seems simplest, but the end result with that is much less productive, and it's probably going to end up as a dusty book on your shelf. So how would I handle it? If I were the township manager, I would look at what the needs are, what specific objectives we were trying to achieve with their strategic plan, what are the most important objectives, and I would decide which of those I felt as though we could handle in-house, which of those things I could do personally, because I've written strategic plans myself. I'm a master facilitator, so I've facilitated literally thousands of public meetings on confrontational issues. I would consider taking on some of those roles and responsibilities myself. Whereas a lot of the data gathering, a lot of the analysis, and a lot of the pulling the documentation together that is less intimate and less about the community and more about pulling documents together from Lansing and other places, I think you put that a lot onto a consultant or a consultant group that does that for a living. And then it's a matter of intermeshing what you're able to come up with internally with what a consultant can do. And I would probably bring a proposal to the board. I would say, we want to do a strategic plan. What are our most important objectives? Here's what I think we should be working on. Here are some of the things I think we can handle in-house. Here are some of the things that I think should be done by a consultant group. Let's consider that. I'd want your feedback on it. Eventually I would hope that we would come to a decision that we would do these certain tasks in-house and we do certain tasks through a consultant. Then I would probably write a RFP, a request for proposals, to see who we could get to help us with what we wanted done. And my eventual goal would just be to make sure we didn't end up with a strategic plan that meant nothing to us.
Great. Any follow-up? Okay. Next question is Pete's.
As a township manager, what would you do, what would be your primary goal for the first year, and how would you accomplish it?
Well, Pete, honestly, I think my goal for the first year would be, a lot of it would be building trust. Building trust not just with the board members, but also with the staff, but also with the people of this community. So, and the way I typically go about that in terms of building trust is carrying myself in a manner where it's important to me to come across as even-keeled and caring and compassionate, and but also I'm very goal-oriented, but I'm not so goal-oriented that I put relationships aside. Relationships are important to me, and I think the only way that you can accomplish goals, accomplish tasks, is to build trusts and to build relationships. So for me to come in here the first year and say, hey, I'm going to make all these changes and do all these grandiose things, I think that would be a mistake. I think the first year would be a lot in building those relationships, building that trust, and partnering, looking for the right people to partner with and the right organizations to partner with in order to achieve the goals that we want to achieve, whether it's something that comes out of that strategic plan. Maybe the first goal is to, develop a strategic plan. I would want to make sure we're all on the same page and working in the same direction on achieving that goal. And I I just lastly would say I typically build trust just by being myself. And I'm a caring person, I'm a compassionate person, I'm an empathetic person, but I also have goals. So I blend those traits together, and pretty tenacious, and I just find ways to get things done. So that would be my goal in the first year.
You showed some of the qualities when you, by working on the trails, and you've done a good job, and thank you for your efforts on that part.
Thanks, Pete. We've gotten, to that end, from where I started, the DNR 16 and a half years ago to where we are now, we've added over 2,000 miles of managed recreational trails in the Upper Peninsula. So not all of that's me. A lot of that's partnerships that I've made and people that I've worked with and organizations that I've helped empower and write grants for. But I'm kind of proud of the legacy there that I've been able to create.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? Okay. Dan has the next question.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Dan.
Realizing that our residents are our stockholders, how would you work with them to keep them informed, educated, and to get their input?
What I heard you say is knowing that our residents are our most important stakeholders, how would I work with them to, and there was something about trust maybe, or?
Well, how would you work with them to keep them informed, educated, and to get their input?
Well, I think maybe an updated strategic plan, some sort of a public input process that we did that really not just delved into a management plan for the township, but a plan that really delved into what the people of the community wanted to see. I think that's really, in a lot of local government organizations, that's really key, is to get, feedback and to get appropriate feedback from communities. Sometimes, for better or for worse, it's only the people that come to the meetings that sometimes steer the direction of the organization. So in a situation like this, I think some real effort should go into getting feedback from people that you normally don't get feedback from. Because just because somebody has the loudest voice doesn't mean their voice is the most important. So I've done a lot of survey writing. When I was extension agent, I worked a lot writing surveys for communities and trying to get feedback that way. I think written surveys are pretty effective if they're done correctly. I also think public forums, if you have topics, subjects, and I think if the meetings are well run, if you tell people, we're going to talk about this, you're going to be there from 7:30 to 8:30, and we're going to accomplish this many things. Anybody that is willing to speak is going to get a chance to speak. As long as those meetings are well run, I think they're very effective. I'm a master facilitator, so I've facilitated lots of meetings, and I think I'm very good at getting people to talk that might not normally talk. So I would set up some community forums, maybe a few based on, whatever the hot topics might be. Maybe it's, discussions about how we're moving forward with the fire and rescue program, how we're moving forward with a strategic plan. If you want to talk about trails, we could do one on trails. There's topics that you can have these forums on that will bring people to the table, that you can get valuable input from the public, which we serve. And I think that's the important part, is we are public servants, whether we're DNR, whether we're federal officials, or whether we're Marquette Township officials. We serve the public, and that's the important part to keep in play here. So when you ask me about how I would work with them and keep them informed, educated, I think the information and education is fairly easy. I think getting input is where a lot of the focus would need to go towards. Getting input from people that might otherwise sit on the sidelines and either complain or have something important not to say and not to say it. And I think you can do that through, like I said, a strategic planning initiative, these forums. I do like the idea of having sometimes just social gatherings where, you know, you can offer snacks and coffee and invite people to air their concerns and not always have it at a formal public meeting where people feel pressured to talk. I think you got to get people, I think you got to get input from people when they're not in a pressured situation, because a lot of people are hesitant to speak up. And I know working for the DNR, unfortunately, we sometimes get really skewed by a minority voice that just happens to be very vocal. So that's what I would be concerned about, is getting that feedback, Dan.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you provide food, they'll come, usually. We've used that.
Food,
Yep.
other incentives, and then if you get a process going where people know that these forums are friendly and they're well run, then they'll build on themselves. If they're not well run, people they just mumble around and fumble around, and they're not well orchestrated, well organized, and well facilitated, people don't come back. If it's well structured, if there's food involved, and they know their voices are being heard, you're going to get valuable input that way.
Okay, Randy, you've got the next question.
Thanks for coming, Ron.
Ed Beer.
Based on your current knowledge of Marquette Township, do you see any changes you would recommend in your first year as township manager? So I'll repeat that. Based on your current knowledge of Marquette Township, do you see any changes you would recommend in your first year as township manager?
Yeah, there are a couple things. I reviewed all your plans, and one of the things I noticed is that in the recreation and trails section of your website, there's a lot of stuff on there about Iron Ore Heritage Trail and Lions Park and the Nicameon Trails Network. There's nothing on there about a very important snowmobile connector that goes from Marquette Township all the way up to Big Bay. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to build around that. That trail sees upwards of more than 500 snowmobiles a day on a given winter weekend, and there's probably some economic development opportunities that we could build around that. And also with that tunnel being there, I think it's going to get more use. And then Trail 5, which is the other access to Big Bay in the western part of the county, that's going to be closed for a good part of this year due to logging. So I'm a big advocate of both motorized and non-motorized recreation. Some people come out on one side or the other. Either they're a biker or a snowmobiler, but they don't do both. Well, guess what? I do both, and I think both forms of trail, motorized, both types of recreation are equally important. I think as people age, it's more difficult for them to, bicycle 50 miles, and it becomes a little more attractive to, ride an OHV or a snowmobile and spend their time that way. So I just saw that as kind of something that I would think is a real asset to the community that's not being we've put a lot of work into it as a department, and I know there's some commercial development that's pending in this area that's very interested in that snowmobile trail, and I was surprised that wasn't mentioned anywhere on the website. Secondary to that, I see a lot of commercial development, retail development, which is good. through a planning process, though, we might want to look at what type of small manufacturing facilities we might be able to draw to Marquette Township. What other type of income-based businesses might be a good fit for Marquette Township. So beyond retail, I think we need to start looking at maybe light industry as a possibility. Thirdly, I think you've done good with your transportation planning. A lot of it was done recently, and things are looking better. But I think we're going to continue to have to look at ways of some good recreation planning for the not recreation, but transportation planning for the future. I think the roundabouts are going to be a big help. The intersections have improved a lot. We don't have all the stoplights and the congestion, and I think that's going to make the community more attractive. So those are a couple thoughts I had.
Any follow-up to that? Okay.
And I didn't mean to criticize your website or criticize the promotion of the things that you have on there, because I think that's all great. I just saw a couple things that got overlooked that I would change.
Mhm. That's important. We'll get into that probably next year when we do the dedication.
Yeah, for the
and add
tunnel.
that
Yeah,
whole component.
yeah.
Dave, you have the next question.
You know, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And if you could add on to the end of that, where you see the township in that same 5 years?
Well, where do I see myself in 5 years? In the Upper Peninsula. I have kind of a mission statement or personal mission that's on my desk at work, which is to raise my family and serve my community in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's longer than that, but that's the shortest realm of it, is that I'm very interested in being a part of the community that I live in. I coach, I work, I serve as much as I can for nonprofit organizations, and then find time to recreate and be a part of my community. So I want to continue to do that. I would welcome the opportunity to do that right here in Marquette Township. In 5 years, I want to be doing what I'm doing. I want to be doing it on a little bit more of an intimate scale. And what I mean by that is I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I've sort of reached a threshold at the state level with the DNR, whereby unless I go, in order to effectuate any more change, or in order to, for any additional opportunity or promotion, I'm going to have to move. So I really don't want to move. So I see, an opportunity here as an opportunity to, be who I want to be, live where I want to live, and help a community grow and prosper, and still be myself. And I'm not sure I can do that in Lansing. I've wrestled with that. I've gone back and forth with myself on that one. Can I be the person I want to be and live the life I want to live, and continue to work my career by because I've had the opportunity to go to Lansing. I've had 3 opportunities to go to Lansing, and each one of them, my heart keeps telling me no. So, well, I'm not sure what that means, but kind of it is important for you to know, because that's what leads me here. Because if I was willing to do that, I wouldn't be looking for other work, because I enjoy the job that I have, and I like the people I work with. So wouldn't be making a change if I didn't need to. I kind of have a need to prosper and look for new opportunities. So I think that answers your question for the next 5 years. Is I want to be a part of this community, and I want to thrive here, and I want to serve. Where do I see Marquette Township in 5 years? Is probably, if I were involved, I would work to really bring the community forums together, have things integrated as well as possible, a direct interface between the people that we serve, the township manager, and the staff. And I have a great work team where I work now. I have 6 employees. We work together as a team. I'm very much a team player. I'm not a top-down, I'm not a hierarchical, I'm not a militant leader or manager. I'm somebody that looks to get the most out of the people that I work with. My direct reports are my teammates. They're not my employees, you know, and because of that, I think we work well together. And I would work to bring that same level of teamwork and capacity to the township, and I would work with the board that I serve in that same manner, and I would, you know, give everything I had to be the best employee I could be, and to accomplish everything that the board set forth and things that were set forth in a management plan or a strategic plan or anything else that the people of the community would want.
Thank you.
So my last question is, why should we hire you?
I'm going to take a drink of water and then I'll answer that.
Absolutely, take your time.
Short answer, the best answer I can give you is I work well with people. I find ways to get things done. I'm a tenacious person. I don't give up easily, and I wouldn't say I never fail, but if I have a goal in mind and the township's on the same page and we're trying to accomplish something, I think through the relationships that I've built in this community, and I mean Marquette Township, and I mean the Upper Peninsula for that matter, because I've worked with people throughout the Upper Peninsula. I think that my ability to work with others, find creative solutions to problems, and work with people from all kinds of backgrounds and diverse personalities, I usually just look for common ground. You know, I'm looking for common ground, whether it be a big land developer or it be a special interest group that wants to save every tree on the planet. You know, my goal is to find common ground, look for ways we can work together and do the right thing, but for the people that we serve. I think that's what gets lost sometimes, is that you have to do the right thing, and it is the public and it is the people that we serve, and I think doing the right thing is the most important, and I have a pretty good barometer for doing the right thing and knowing how to interrelate with people from all different walks of life, all different personalities, and I tend not to get up. I tend to be pretty even-keeled. I don't get too upset about things, or I'll just take my lumps and, you know, not my lumps, but I'll just take information and process it and move on, and then it's typically I'll make my next move. But I guess the best reason to hire me is if you were looking for somebody with those traits, you know, with that capacity to get along with others and to care about, you know, the people that you serve and to accomplish mutual goals. If that's what you're looking for, I'm probably a really good candidate. If you're looking for, you know, something different, maybe a, you know, more hierarchical or top-down person who likes to say the way things are going to be rather than work towards, you know, a comprehensive solution, then I'm probably not your person.
Any follow-up on that? Pete?
Not to follow up on that, but my question is, what do you hear about our township? Because you're local and you live in Nagani. What do you hear about our township, what we're doing in that? What would you do to, excel in it, what we're doing, the good stuff? And the bad stuff, what would you change? If any, if there are any negatives out there, what would you change? And if the good stuff, how could you add to it?
Honestly, in terms of any of the bad stuff that's ever been said or heard or that I've been involved with in terms of Marquette Township, it's been very little. I mean, there are other townships that I work with that are much more difficult to work with and that have boards that are much more notoriously difficult to work with, and I wouldn't be applying for those jobs. Quite frankly, everything in Marquette Township is, I think, run pretty well. I think the US 41 corridor has been, I was on that advisory committee for many years early on because we were dealing with the trail, and at one time they wanted to turn the Heritage Trail into a side road or an access road to get to the back of Walmart and Menards and things like that. So I was involved with that. And at that time I knew, how much stress there was in terms of how you're going to create a U.S. highway, through all this development and do it without a million stoplights and traffic congestion, and then you're going up a hill on top of it. So, I think the 41 Advisory Committee eventually came up with some fairly good solutions. Probably could do a little bit more with some access roads and things like that, because I do think that you're going to continue to grow. As far as things that we could focus on together would be the issue of sprawl and trying to navigate growth in a way that we tried to develop areas that were either brownfields or were current industrial developments or commercial developments that weren't being used before we just allowed further development on new lands and keep moving west towards Nagani Township. I think there's some in-blighting that could occur. So typically I would be guiding the township towards that. Less sprawl and more use of underused resources. As far as what I hear good, whenever I've brought things to the board, wherever I've worked with Marquette Township, we've always been able to come to, whether it was working with any of the staff people. I've had positive working relationships. In the trails world, the tunnel took a lot, but eventually, that was a success. The township had a big role in that. The DNR built the trail on both sides of it. We partially funded it, and now we're buying easements and property, and we're building on the north side to connect up to the Longyear property. One thing that we are going to have to talk about is and work through is all that commercial forest property that's in Marquette Township, and finding ways to hopefully keep that in some sort of quasi-public use. My concern there is that if that were to all get sold off, sectioned off, and developed privately, that we would lose our NTN trailhead, we would lose our snowmobile trail, we would lose our connection, because right now we almost have it complete from the tunnel all the way up to Forestville, and then all the way up to the trails at Wetmore Landing and Hogsback. And my goal a couple years ago was to try and make those connections. And right now we have some impasses with some of the commercial landholders, but I think that's something we should think about, because you could really have, you've got the city of Marquette, you've got Marquette Township, and then you have this nice this nice perimeter of recreational properties that really make living here attractive, and I think in the future are going to make commercial and residential development attractive. But if that's gone, if that's not accessible, that's not going to serve the future generations as well as I think we would like to.
Thank you.
So, for your information, we're not going to make a decision today. We are going to schedule a special meeting and do our deliberating. And at that meeting, we will also discuss the current manager's contract and if we want to make any changes with the new candidate. I don't know when that'll be. We're going to schedule that today. The board has seen the questions that I asked of your references, and they've seen the answers. You have glowing references. Everybody loves you, especially your boss. I talked to him.
I wasn't sure how that would go.
He was very supportive, and he absolutely doesn't want to lose you, but he understands completely, and he thinks you can do this job just fine. I just thought you should know that.
I appreciate knowing that. My relationship with my boss is good. I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not leaving a bad situation, so I'm not in any hurry to, like you were talking about, decisions and that. I'm not in a situation I'm trying to get out of, so to speak. You know. There are some stresses in my current job. It's mostly to do with FEMA response. I don't know if you got into that or not, but I've been tasked not just with my job as trails coordinator, but I'm also the FEMA response coordinator for all of Houghton County. So there was that flood that hit in June of 2018. So not only do I have my regular job, I have all that on top of that, and that has been difficult. I'm learning emergency response. I'm learning FEMA, but it's a lot, and it really should be done by experts in that field. So that's a little bit of a struggle with me right now, but other than that, honestly, I love my job. I love the people I work with, and you know, I'm in no hurry.
Yeah, he said your employees, love working with you too. So that's a good thing. And I know you from the Heritage Trail. I didn't start at the very beginning, but you were involved with that first part of getting it all established in the millage and everything put up. I was treasurer at the time. So you were in the audience a lot, very valuable, very knowledgeable, cooperative. So that's a plus too. We have a couple more questions. I don't know who was first. Okay.
Ron, as Marquette Township is a small organization, as you well know, what is your view on succession planning?
Well, I think whether you're a small organization or a large organization, I think succession planning is very important in the respect that hopefully what the individuals in your seats, the individual in all the seats that make this township successful, finding people to fill in behind you is important. I mean, board members, you can only go on for so long in those roles before somebody else has to step up, and I think the best way to have positive successional planning is to have people ready to step into those roles that aren't afraid to step into those roles. So, in other words, having a well-run organization helps a lot with your successional planning. If things are a mess and things are defunct and people aren't getting along and there's closed sessions meetings and the public's aware that there's constant conflict, if it's not, you're going to have a hard time finding board members, okay? Same thing with employees. If you have a supervisor or you have people within the township that don't like working there and don't like the way things are run, that filters throughout the community, and it gets very difficult to bring anybody new in that's going to want to step into that role and be a part of that, because nobody wants to step into a mess, you know. And typically, if somebody really, really wants to be a part of a mess, maybe they're a mess already. So it's important to have, in order to have smooth successional planning, I think the best thing is to have the foundation and the groundwork and have those positive working relationships and finding the people that want to, you know, be a part of that. Because most people want to be a part of something good. Very few people want to be a part of something that's failing.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Pete?
No, I asked my,
Oh,
oh, my light on or off?
yeah, it was. It's off, it's on now. Okay, you're good.
I'm gonna have to take him to school.
I put a light on mine, so I know what's on or off.
I have a panel here that tells me that they have a question. So we just got it yesterday, Tuesday, thanks to Dave. So it helps a little bit.
I forgot to write the training program.
We need a manual.
Sounds like it's pretty new, so I don't know that you had a chance for a training program.
Yeah, we just tried it Tuesday night. It's our second time.
On the fly training.
Anything else? Any other questions from the board? How about questions for us? Anything you need to know
Yeah,
about the
well,
township or the job? Or-
residency requirement, where are we at with that?
Nope, no residency requirement.
Um, I guess the only question I would have, other than things I've hit on, what are you folks looking for in a township manager? What things that I,
What skills and
yeah,
accomplishments? Well, because we haven't talked specifically about this yet with even, everything we do has to be in the public. We can't discuss things in private. We can't talk among ourselves.
mm-hmm,
So what you see is what you get, what our questions are, and
okay,
so we haven't really discussed our ideal candidate, if you would. We need someone whose government knowledge, because we're a charter township, that's different than a village or a city
Yeah.
or a general law. That's important. Strategic planning is important. Budgeting, grant writing, human resources. There's somewhere around 17 employees, I believe. 2 different kinds of unions, or types, whatever terminology you want to use. Lots of media, whether that's radio or TV or questions from state governments, forms, obviously, to fill out. You know, the job description is pretty varied and wide. You pretty much have to know a little bit at least of everything.
mm-hmm,
Because you're going to get hit with whatever every day. Every 5 minutes, something different's going to go on.
right,
It's a quiet atmosphere compared to my type of work. It's a lot more reserved. It's very professional. What am I missing, guys?
It's a 24/7 position, really, what it amounts to.
So we need a perfect person.
okay. Well,
Somebody that can be visionary too and plan for the future. It's too easy to just get an agenda every couple weeks and focus on that. I think some organizations cripple themselves by doing that. They don't look at 5 years, 10 years, or even from that 10,000-foot perspective. Some of our surrounding communities just focus on the impact of themselves, and I like to think that we think about the county, if not the UP.
mm-hmm,
That's important, I think, for us, because we are all in this together. And I think some of the municipalities are just all about what they need, and nobody can see our borders.
no,
they don't know when they come into town, other than the signage maybe a little bit, welcome to our community. So we need somebody that can think beyond that.
Okay.
Anything else for
No,
us?
yeah, probably as I leave here and think about the process and think about the job, I'm certain I would have more questions, and you know, if it comes to, you know, if you guys decide to, you know, talk further about me as a candidate, then I may have some more questions, but I don't have anything right now.
Well, like I said, we'll have a special meeting. All of our meetings are open, so as a candidate or whoever, you're welcome to always come. Again, we don't know when that'll be. We're going to try to schedule it today. Our last interview is at 5, so we should be finished by somewhere around 6, and we need to schedule that so we can get this closed up too. 'Cause we need to make a decision. The manager's contract expired on the 31st of December, and he asked for an extension, and the board granted it. So he will be here more than likely till at least June 1st.
Oh,
So we
okay,
have time.
all right,
We don't have to decide right away. We're just in the process of finishing our budget for the year.
Sure.
The next 2 meetings on the 3rd and the 17th or 18th would be to follow that process. We have 2 meetings of rectifying and finishing up the budget. And like I've said, we want to get into strategic planning and a couple topics next year. Hopefully in January we can start that. So we're kind of going to be busy, but you can ask questions anytime. You know, pick up the phone and ask me. Or the hardest thing that I'm dealing with as a board member and a part of the township is doing this from the perspective of one. I mean, everything we do, we speak with one voice, but hiring somebody, we're one body, so that's a little bit different. It has to be handled differently than, you know, me hiring a bookkeeper or something like that in my business.
yeah,
So you would have one boss, the whole board, 7 people.
yeah.
It's a different concept for some people to try to get their arms around.
It is. I've done it before, so I've been in that
Yeah.
role. Yeah.
If you can juggle, we can't direct you independently. You know, we have to speak with one voice. So this has been an interesting experience. So you would be our only employee based on this contract that we would put together. And then your employees are the rest of the township employees. So it's kind of different. If you have issues with them, we have to kind of, there are ways to get around that for the board if the board has input, you know, but they're your responsibility. So it's kind of a different structure.
Yeah. So how many employees did you say the township had?
I think it's 17 total,
17.
somewhere in there.
Those are all full-time, or you had some full and part-time?
That includes the regular full-time fire department,
Yeah,
and then there are on-call, so if those would be considered part-time, or they're paid on-call firefighters, but the public works and the rest of the office and everything, planning, zoning, assessing, those are all full-time.
okay.
Grounds workers too, building and grounds. 2 unions involved.
Okay.
Anything else for us?
No, I didn't know about the 2 unions. That's fine. I was a union steward at one time, so I have experience working with unions, and I understand the union processes, so.
Anything else from the board? Pete?
The township's over the years been sort of proactive as tries to take care of it, try to be ahead of the curve on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we haven't experienced some of the big problems like infrastructure and stuff like that as other communities have, because we try to be ahead of it. We need somebody who'll be proactive and research a lot of the stuff that we should be fixing up and taking care of, so. It's always a challenge. I think we did pretty good over the years, not this board, but other previous boards, to keep the township going the right way. Commercial infrastructure, trails, and we try to, be very active as far as recreation, all the different departments, so.
I think that shows through, and that's why when you ask me the question about what I hear that's good and bad, it's pretty much all good. I think, like you said, this board and previous boards have done a good job of looking forward and being proactive and thinking about what the community needs are going to be. So, as I said, it's part of the reason I'm here.
Well, sometimes you go different places and you hear people say about this and that, and complain about that, different things and that, but it could be just one individual, but we have to look at all the residents and what's good for everybody, so. Because when we do a project, everybody's gonna pay for it, so.
Yeah. I deal with that a lot in the trails world on a little smaller spectrum, but in working with communities,
Come a long way as far as trails and that, as far as getting things through here and people really enjoying it, We went to a meeting one time and I looked out the window and there were about 7 or 8 doctors out there, fighting for trails and different things like that. And they always said, I can work anywhere, but I come up here because of the recreation.
yeah.
you know, so.
No, that's true. I think that's going to be a continual draw to our community and to, that's why people want to be a part of Marquette and Marquette Township is what else we have to offer.
So as I used to say, you did good.
It's not,
Okay, are we good? Okay, you are excused.
well, thanks, folks. Have a great
Thank you.
weekend. I appreciate the opportunity
Yeah,
to interview, and
appreciate you coming.
no matter which way you head, I fully understand, so thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Have a nice holiday.
2:10, we are in recess. Okay, it's 3 PM, Friday, November 22nd, 2019, and we are back in session at a special meeting to interview candidates for the township manager position. This is candidate number 3 today. We've already done 2 before. This will be recorded, just so you know, John. It's on, so it'll be on YouTube. You're kind of familiar, but for the public's purposes too, in case they just joined us later. It's recorded, audio and video, and you can find us on YouTube. Excuse me. The process today will be a couple minutes, 10, 15 minutes on you. You can share with us whatever you want about yourself or whatever. We'll do about 5 minutes per question, and there are 7 questions and then 1 final. So roughly half hour, 35, 40 minutes, somewhere in there. And then about 10 minutes or whatever, you can ask us questions or any follow-ups or anything that comes up, but.
I hope I have enough to fill the void.
Okay, that sounds good. The board members now, especially, have been privy to the reference questions that I asked. Your case is a little bit different because you're a current employee. So we did use Randy as one of your references, and then we took your past supervisor. And both gave you glowing reviews, just so you know.
That's a good start, thank you.
Yep, it is. So let me shift gears here now, since I had my folder closed. Thought I had it on top. Don't tell me I lost them now. Oh, they got buried. Okay. So the first question is, oh, no questions. You. Tell us about you. Whatever you want to share about John.
Okay, well, you've known me for about 2 months now, which is barely time to get to know me. I think I've demonstrated, though, in that short time an ability to work in this capacity, regardless of what title I hold. I've been working my whole life. I'm 4th of 10 kids, so obviously we all had to do our share. whether it was mowing the lawn, shoveling the driveway. We also became pretty resourceful and used those skills we learned at home to earn our first bucks around the neighborhood, delivering newspapers, weeding the neighbors' gardens, cutting their grass, shoveling their driveways. At 14, my first W-2 paying job was washing dishes at the local family restaurant. Rode my bike to work every day in the summer, and rode it home until I parked it on the back end of a parked car, but that's probably not something you need to know. I have a scar to prove it. So anyway, I did that for quite a few years. The day I turned 18, I started managing the restaurant. I had moved up through fryers to line cook. One of my first shifts as a college student, I didn't have classes on Tuesdays, showed up to open in the morning, and the waitress called in sick. Called around, couldn't find a replacement, so I was running the show that whole day. That was probably my first introduction to life when things don't go well. I was waiting on customers, trying to serve them coffee, and you know what happens when you run out of coffee, or the coffee gets cold, or the cups don't get filled, and you're still trying to take their orders and prepare their food. It was probably the biggest eye-opener of my life, in that you have to rely on the people around you, and when the people around you fail, you all fail. So I'm a big proponent of teamwork, relying on everyone to do their part. Graduated from Tech in '96. Went to work in central Wisconsin for the company that I'd co-opted with. I survived there for a year. It was pretty brutal work in the summer, and then mostly chasing work all winter. Seemed like kind of a dead-end career for me, so I went into municipal consulting, and that's probably what led me here today. A company called Clark Dietz in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We worked for metro areas, Antioch, Illinois, which is a west suburb of Chicago, as well as city of Park City, which was an interesting city on the north side of Chicago. It was their claim to fame was the only city in the U.S. that was basically a trailer park. It was an interesting claim on their part, in that they were proud of it. And it was really a pretty nice city, but it was built in almost a floodplain, so the homes had to be elevated anyway. I moved from there to the concrete jungle in Metro Detroit. I worked there for 4 years for OHM, more municipal consulting in Auburn Hills, Rochester Hills. Did a little bit in the village of Mabee, as well as the village of Orion, I believe. That's on my resume. I can't remember that one. It was one project, so not really material in the big scheme of things. But married the boss's daughter and skedaddled to the UP. And fortunately, my father-in-law is a hunter, so he let me get away with it. And when I say boss's daughter, I worked with her. That's how we met. He was not my boss, but he was one of the owners of the company. So we've been married happily since 2002. Three young children. The oldest has not yet entered high school, so I plan on being around for a long time no matter what I'm doing. And I can tell you our home is in Marquette County. No, it's not in Marquette Township, but we plan on staying in this area for as long as we can, if not forever. So that's the biggest reason why I took the job here as your superintendent of public works, because we intend to stay in the area. And when the job I had didn't present the opportunities that I was looking for at the time, a job open that only comes around once every 40 years, it's pretty hard to pass that up. Why I'm sitting here today, some people would ask me what I'm thinking, because I already have a job that's could be considered pretty stable when Kirk's done it for 40 years. The honest answer is I like to do parts of both of those jobs, and I find the work in general to be rewarding. Yeah, both jobs have parts that I really don't enjoy, but what job is perfect? So anyway, I did skip the minor diversion to Wisconsin again. I had taken a job after we moved back to the UP. I had taken a job with Advanced Drainage Systems, which is, they make the black corrugated drain tile. It's the company that has the green stripe on it. That's what their marketing technique is. So it's not just any black pipe, it's the black pipe with the green stripe on it. It was a very enjoyable experience. I worked from home for 3 years. I doubled the sales volume in my territory in that time. In fact, I was on track for a pretty significant record year when the housing bubble burst and they started cutting positions. Unfortunately, a record year for somebody in the UP is nothing compared to the company dealing with major shortfalls in sales company-wide. I had the entire UP, my sales volume was a quarter of the next smallest sales territory in the state, so it was pretty obvious to see where they were going to cut first. So the nearest job I found at that point was in the village of Weston, Wisconsin. Probably one of the more enjoyable short parts of my career that I would have enjoyed doing for a long time, just because it was exactly the kind of thing that I had worked on from a consultant's perspective. I was a stormwater utility manager, which most municipalities in Wisconsin have stormwater utilities because of their DNR stormwater discharge quality requirements, something Michigan does not have. Instead, we have Bolt versus Lansing, which makes it tough for most municipalities to find the willpower to create a stormwater utility, Marquette being the one exception in the UP. So anyway, that was a short stint. I think I would have fit in very well there. I didn't have to work very hard, in my opinion, to stand out as an employee. If you noticed on my resume, they gave me their Employee of the Month or something like that, Outstanding Service Award 2 months after starting. And I think that's just an example of my work ethic. So after that, our house wasn't selling. The housing bubble had burst. Nobody could get financed. We had accepted several offers. They all fell through. So it was pretty obvious paying for a mortgage and rent in Wisconsin at the same time wasn't going to be a long career move. So the job in Ishpeming opened up. I almost didn't even apply for it because the way the description was written, I didn't feel I was qualified. It was advertised as a superintendent of public works, and it almost looked like they had advertised it like they wanted somebody with a CDL, which I've never had. While I also didn't have a water operator certificate at the time either. Lo and behold, they offered me the job, 8.5 years, and quite honestly, the reason I was there 8.5 years is because I enjoyed it that long. I really did, and would have stayed longer if the environment was maybe a little more inviting longer. So that's why I intend to stay in municipal work as long as I possibly can. Hopefully the jobs won't run out before me. I want this to be my last move. I've moved jobs twice now in the last 2 years, and when I first came here, I was feeling the burnout of trying to leave my last position in the best spot possible for the person coming in after me. That included getting the budget done for him, which has been approved. So Marquette Township's 2020 budget is done. I don't know that it was perfect because I was rushing to get that and everything else done that suddenly needed to be before I left. And been here. I have to tell you, when I was deciding to come here, I think everyone knows I had the option to go back to Ishpeming. That was where my heart was, based on the 8.5 years I had worked there. But I also knew that there were challenges there just based on personalities, everything else. So when this opportunity was sitting in front of me at the same time, it was pretty easy to come here because I felt I had 100% support as opposed to a split decision. And of course, I had talked to Randy long before even applying, and he had mentioned that he would be retiring. I don't know if that was his bait and switch to get me to come here or not, but it's also part of the reason why I did apply for this position, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview for it. My opinion regarding this position is either I'm going to impress you enough that I'm the new manager here, or somebody else is going to impress you more, and that person will be my boss, so I can't lose, and that means you can't lose either. That's pretty much me.
Great, thank you. Any questions for him right now? We have more, though. Okay, John has the first question. This John.
First, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here today. And we're proud, I think, to have you. Our first question for you to give us an answer, if you can. Describe your understanding of charter township government and the differences from general law government, if you can. Thanks.
I probably won't even come close to hitting on all of the differences because there are many. The biggest advantage to being a charter township over a general law township, of course, is a little more protection from annexation, but also a charter township requires 4 trustees as opposed to 2. And I don't know if that's in every situation, but I'm pretty sure it is. And of course, township boards, the supervisor, clerk, and treasurer being the 3 officers of the board, and then the 4 trustees. How they function overall compared to cities or villages isn't really that much different on the surface, but I think there are little nuances here and there based on the laws that allow the different types of municipalities to exist that have to be paid attention to. And I really have not, in my short career as a charter township employee, not quite 2 years now, so come upon a situation that I couldn't figure out from either reading it in the red MTA book or talking to those around me, because generally speaking, operating municipalities is not that complicated. It's just making sure you're doing it legally.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any follow-up to that? Okay. My question is, the board has adopted policy governance. Describe your understanding of it and how the manager's position relates to it.
That's a question I should have prepared a little bit more for, because I've always just made some assumptions about policy governance. I've heard Randy talk about it on numerous occasions, even before I was an employee. But my understanding is the board establishes the policies. The manager is expected to carry out those policies to the extent that the board authorizes him to. I also believe that there's an implied or maybe even expressed chain of command in that. Maybe I'm wrong because I didn't do my homework on it, but the practice I'm used to, which was not specifically adopted as the phrase policy governance, as the manager, I reported to the supervisor on a daily basis, but my door was open to anyone on the board at any time. And then any communication from the board to staff usually followed the chain of command through the manager to the department heads to the staff. I've always believed in an open door policy because the more communication we have, the more successful we are. I don't know if I've hit on all of the aspects of policy governance, but that's my understanding of it. And I'm hoping that regardless of the description of the policy governance that you have adopted, that my understanding of it will be acceptable.
Do you know how the policy government relates between the manager and the board? Do you have any more thoughts on that rather than just to the township?
Well, my assumption is the board decides specifically what roles the manager plays within the organization, which, to me, it makes sense, and maybe I'm completely missing something, so.
No, that's okay. Just wanted to make sure it was clear. Any follow-up? Ernie has the third question.
What it is, my question is, describe the process you would follow to establish a strategic plan for the township.
Establish a strategic plan?
Yes.
That's a good one, because it's never a process that I've been involved in from start to finish, despite being in the same municipality for 8.5 years. And the reason why is that municipality had a master plan that expired. A strategic plan in particular, the first thing you have to do is figure out who you want to be part of your planning process. And of course, in Marquette Township, the township is blessed to have a very good planner. That's my opinion of Jason, having known him for quite a long time, probably as long as he's been an employee here. I don't know exactly when I first met him, but I would guess he's been here about as long as I was in the city of Ishpeming.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so anyway, I would guess that the strategic planning process from that perspective would be a weakness of mine, which may be one of your future questions, because I get asked that all the time.
Okay. Any follow-up to that? We have done one, and we've pretty much accomplished everything. We need to start over and do, I already warned the board, January we were going to get going on some more stuff. So
I do know
We've been
that
through it.
public input is a critical part of that process.
fourth question falls to Pete.
As a township manager, what would be your primary goal for the next year, and how would you accomplish it?
For the next year, my goal would to be to get comfortable with all aspects of the operation of the township, because I think that's about what it would take for a municipality and an organization of this size. I've been here 2 months. I've gotten to know my department fairly well, but I can guarantee I haven't learned every aspect of what they do yet. And to include all of the other departments in that understanding, I think it would make sense to make that a priority, as well as getting a full understanding of what the board's expectations are moving forward. That should actually be the first priority.
Would you have a problem in making changes that have been set in stone, so to speak? Do you have any problem with that? Tackling
One of the first
change.
things I learned when entering township management was you have to be flexible, and I actually learned that from Randy. It was probably the most valuable piece of advice I could get when becoming the township manager in Chocolate, because we all get pretty set in our ways, and I think that includes the people that have been here for a long time. I'm a firm believer in we don't continue doing it because it's the way we've always done it, unless it makes sense to continue doing it that way. So, am I willing? I think I've demonstrated already with my involvement in the proposed Public Works restructuring. I also think that you would find, if you talk to anyone involved in those conversations behind the scenes, that I want to find the best solution for everybody. And that doesn't necessarily just mean staff in one situation or whatever specific group. So it has to be what's best for the community long-term.
Thank you.
Good. Anything else? Okay. Question 5 is from Dan.
Okay. Realizing that our residents are our stockholders, how would you work with them to keep them informed, educated, and to get their input?
The first thing I would do is continue with the way we're already communicating with them. And if there's ways that we can improve upon that by setting up the email type news blasts, that was something we were working on in Chocolate Township. It hadn't been completed before I left, simply because we found that we had a hard time communicating with those that weren't paying attention all the time. Those that were paying attention all the time knew everything that was going on, sometimes knew before we did. Those that did not pay attention either weren't on Facebook, didn't come to Township Hall enough to see the postings on the boards, would never remember to grab a newsletter off the counter because we avoided paying the postage costs on the newsletter mailings. It was just one of those costs that the Township Board there chose not to pay. I like the idea of the email subscription for any types of meeting announcements, those kinds of things. Continuing to utilize the utility bills to inform people of small blurb, I guess you could call them tweet-type length notifications. I've never been on Twitter myself. I've been on Facebook just because I managed municipal Facebook pages myself, two in the city of Ishpeming, as well as recently started the one in Chocolate Township right before I left. So I don't like to think of myself as a power Facebook user because I've tried not to let it become a distraction in my life, and for a while it did, maybe because I was looking for something different. I feel like now I don't have much time to be on it anymore, and I don't miss it. There's too many true things on there that I don't believe, so anyway.
Okay, all right. Question 6 is from Randy.
Okay, thanks for coming, John. Based on your current knowledge of Marquette Township, do you see any changes you would recommend in your first year as township manager?
Only the one that I've proposed, or been a part of proposing so far, and that's the Public Works restructuring. And I can tell you in the 2 months I've been here, my department has only been my only focus, so beyond that, I haven't really taken much time to think about what's next if we get that one across the finish line. So is it possible that there's plenty of other changes that could happen or be proposed? I would imagine there are. Kind of goes back to the question that Pete asked about whether or not I'm resistant to changing things that have been set in stone for a long time. If it makes sense to do it, I'll recommend it, for sure.
The board's already excited about the restructuring and, you know, however that plays out. I mean, the concept of shaking things up, so it's already in the works. That's good.
And as a follow-up to that,
Absolutely.
as a follow-up question to that, what is your thoughts on succession planning, like in this organization?
I would say the succession planning here is better than anywhere I've been in my life. I'm working with Kirk until January 7th now, I believe, so there's another bonus week in there, which I'm not complaining about. The majority of jobs I've entered in my life, it's been, here's the office that somebody vacated a month ago, there's what they were working on, good luck. Here, I'm actually kind of trying to be patient, not taking things off of Kurt's desk until he's ready for me to. Simply out of respect for somebody that's worked in the position for 40 years, it needs to be on his terms, in my opinion. That being said, it's also given me opportunity to step in and work on things that I see need to be done. Randy has come to us requesting we get done. The budget revisions, right up my alley. I've prepared two budgets, start to finish, pretty much on my own. That was one that I kind of walked into with enough background to figure out how the numbers were calculated. but you still have to make all the numbers work in the end, too. Balanced budgets being very important. I kind of strayed from what the original question was.
Succession planning.
Right. I think it's great that Marquette Township has succession planning in your hiring processes. Having overlap is so huge. I think probably the most important thing is hearing from Kirk the history of how the infrastructure in this township started from day one. And from what I understand, Kmart is what started it all. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's invaluable. Okay, anything else? Okay, number 7 is Dave's.
First part of it is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Is where do you see yourself in 5 years, and the second part is where do you see the township in 5 years?
I'm hoping in 5 years, I'm reminding everybody how great of a decision I made coming here in the first place. And quite honestly, when I say that, I don't think it matters what title comes after my name, and I think that applies to this whole conversation. I really think I can provide the township good leadership as the next township manager. If I'm not the best option, I'm okay with that. As far as where the township is 5 years from now, I want the township to be even more financially stable than it currently is, prepared to address any infrastructure issue that may come its way because we had good planning getting there. And a lot of thanks to Kirk and those before me in getting the asset management plans to the point they are. One of them due I guess next Wednesday, and the other due the end of the year. That's just the sewer and water. I would like to see the future planning of that rolled into the planning for the roads as we get into more reconstruction as opposed to maintenance overlays or chip seals, making sure that we have a good plan for how we're replacing what's underneath it when it needs to be and not sooner, or not when it's too late, which is the worst you can do. I've seen enough of that happen over the years. And of course, I want to see the township having accomplished the goals of its new strategic planning process, if I can put the question from earlier that I had trouble answering together with that. I think the township is being left in good hands when Randy walks out the door, no matter who the next manager is. And the responsibility of the next manager will be to ensure that how we got here continues into the future so that all aspects of township service are maintained or improved upon.
Thanks.
Any follow-up? Pete?
John, through your travels, you've been in different places. You know Marquette very well, Marquette County. What did you see out there that we could do in Marquette Township, not only for our corridor, but the business part of it, and different other things like that, that would make our township better?
I think exactly what the township is starting right now, and of course the grant that the township just received for the planning with the sustainably built environment grant? I forget exactly what it was for, but it came out of those sustainability, that series of meetings that occurred over the past year or two. I think I attended 2 of them, but getting the planning process in place so that you know what you want first, and then you find a way to pay for it. And of course, concerns along the highway corridor regarding street lighting, non-motorized facilities, safe crossings on the east end, those don't come with a small price tag. So if there isn't grant money involved, it's going to be very difficult to do unless there's new DDA funding or something like that to accomplish it, or a new grant program that maybe doesn't exist today. Of course, safe routes to school will only take you so far down the corridor as well, because eventually you get too far away from the school to even provide any benefit. I don't know that I've seen anything more specific than that. The examples that were shown of the Ishpeming planning process for Lake Bancroft Park, which they ended up building a pavilion at the end of that process. It's about the only part that they did do, except for rebuilding the non-motorized bike path along the road there. But it gave them kind of the sky's the limit type of visualizing. And to have people put those down on paper so that you can project them on a screen for everyone to see and say, yeah, that looks like a great idea, or no, it doesn't, helps you decide really quick whether or not it makes sense for what you're after. It sounds like there might be opportunities with plantings in the median with this type of project that would have new funding sources available for that haven't been around long-term. So does that answer your question? Probably not, but it should hopefully tell you that I understand what you're after.
I'm just looking for that magic bullet out there that come into Marquette Township, and,
I saw a rainbow the other day.
yeah, there's no pot of gold.
You know,
That's still the grant that we're still looking for.
there are grants. It's just finding the one that's specific for what you're trying to accomplish.
I'm a little concerned about our commercial corridor going up and down the highway, and, you know, the problems with malls and stuff like that, and we're trying to save our mall. We're not, they are, and we're trying to support them, and in the business along, as we extend out to west, there's some challenge that we have as far as zoning and stuff like that. And north, we can only go so far that way, and so I guess it's not our job to go recruit companies to come in, but I always look around when I go to town to see what's thriving in what areas, why they are, and stuff like that, and I just thought maybe you see that.
Yeah, I think everyone knows there's some catching
Just
up
as
to
long
do
as we
along
do
the
our
highway.
planning for that particular
Sure.
item, you know.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Any more follow-up? Okay. My last question is, why should we hire you as township manager?
I was fully expecting that question, and I've thought about it for a long time. And my honest answer is, you should hire me if you feel I'm the best candidate coming out of the end of the day today. If you don't, then you shouldn't. And I don't know what I'm up against as far as the other candidates, and that's perfectly fine. My only objective is, if I'm the best candidate for the township moving forward, then I will do my best to prove that you made the right decision.
Any follow-up to that?
Difficult.
Kind of hard to follow that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So going forward, we will find my other notes. Go ahead, Ernie.
Push the button this time.
Okay, it's more important during a board meeting.
I just have a question. You brought up about working with Kurt and looking at the historical stuff of the infrastructure. Is any of that stuff documented to really go back and see what happened from when Kmart really come in on 41, when they ran that up and that? And
The infrastructure being built, yes. The nice thing about the sewer and water systems here in the township is they are fairly new in that they're really not any older than I am. So the records are much better. When you start getting back into the 1950s and earlier, the records are probably, oh, that page is so worn you can't even read it anymore. It gets thrown out, and that was the only copy you had left. When I went to Ishpeming, that was almost their whole system. The only reason we had good records on any of their infrastructure is they had a sewer separation project in the 1980s. So those records were pretty accurate. But the 1950s era water main, we were relying on Carl Baldwin for whatever he had in his ticker. Here, being that it's all 1970s and earlier, we still have a lot of those record drawings sitting on our shelves, and a lot of them have been scanned into the server already.
Go ahead.
Follow that up on Fair Avenue. The water line there. Dan knows what I'm talking about there too. That was put in the 1950s, and no one really knew what it was, or where it was, or who was responsible for it back in the 50s and that. And we finally got some information from the city at that, because they had nothing in the township at the time. That's the information, trying to put in a historical factor so we know what's going on. Yeah, I know it's all been replaced now.
Yep.
It's all been done. But
That
prior
was,
to
that was originally cast iron water main installed by the city, and it's
To
been
Van Halen
replaced
School.
with ductal iron.
To the
Yep.
school. That was it.
Yep, and there was another section on Grove Street.
That was-
Same thing.
Yes, yeah. That's it.
Pete?
John, how important, I mean, we read articles in the paper and, I mean, in these magazines and that, about the importance of water. You know, we have a combination, we have wells, and then we're working with Marquette City. You know, how important do you feel that it is to have our own water supply or a backup in that?
I think having as many options as possible to provide safe drinking water to our customers is what we should be striving for. I personally live on well water, and it's very good well water. Had the powers that be in Chocolate Township at that time chosen a public water supply, I would be on a public water supply. I don't know what the source would have been, because I'm not sure that they ever made that final decision. They walked away from that before the public water supply ever happened. But sooner or later, I have a feeling I'm going to be paying for a public water supply in my neighborhood, and it's going to be a lot more expensive than if they had done it when they drilled new wells for everybody instead.
When I was more active in Chocolate, there's things that we talked about years ago, and they just put it on the shelf. You know, oh, we don't want that here, we don't, you know, and it's gonna come around to bite them in the back, you know, they just wouldn't listen. And that's why I always try to think about up here, what can we do? And that's why a lot of my questions are, what can we do differently? What to upkeep with everything, you know, be ahead of the curve rather than behind.
I think the biggest thing is we need to pay attention to what our water demand is going to be and figure out what our sources can provide so that we don't run ourselves short. We obviously have a pretty good supply from the city of Marquette, but the cost to pump it into our other pressure districts higher up the hill becomes almost prohibitive. So having the well system provide adequate water for the higher pressure districts is pretty important. And if we're going to expand any further, then we have to look at the project that was shelved up by Morgan Meadows. So
Thank you.
doesn't sound like the need is there currently, but I'm sure it will be again in the future
Well, that's why I
sometime.
keep asking, what do you see coming and stuff like that, so we can think about it and discuss it and stuff like that. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so we are not gonna make a decision today. We're gonna schedule a special meeting for next week to look at the manager's current contract, see what we want to change or not, or leave, or amend, or whatever, and hopefully make a decision then. That's kind of the intent. What else do I need to tell them? I think that's it.
You know where to find me regardless of what you decide.
Anything for us? Do you have any questions for us as to anything?
No, I recognize you have a difficult decision to make, one that you haven't had to make in
Ever for
a
this
decade and a
group.
half.
Yeah.
And choosing the next person is going to be very important, because I'm sure whoever you're interviewing, there's multiple different skill sets being presented. So choosing the right one for the future is going to be an interesting discussion for you, and I'm going to stay out of it as much as I can because I'm part of it. So
Thank you.
Thanks.
thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Appreciate
Thanks,
you
John.
coming in. Well, you are dismissed.
Thank you.
This is not a class.
Well, it is kind of. So it's
I guess I have to go back to
3:43.
work.
Yeah. Thought you were getting off for another 15 minutes,
I've got
eh?
a deadline next Wednesday.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
So information for the board, our fourth candidate is scheduled for 5 PM tonight, and they have withdrawn from consideration for the position. Okay?
Did I hear that right?
Yes, you did. Personal reasons. Regretfully personal reasons. So it's not, it was out of his control. So he will not be considered. So are we required, I guess, I don't know if you know that or if it'd have to be a Roger question, to be here at 5 o'clock and stay open and reconvene and?
We can just put a posting on the door. We can finish our meeting and put a posting at the door that we're done,
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
because we have no business, more further business to conduct in public, so.
Why you don't put an end time on
Yeah.
agenda?
Okay, yeah, that
So-
sounds all right.
So I guess continue down with the agenda and we can finish this.
Yes. Next item will be to schedule a special meeting. And we did already look at our calendars, which helped, because I didn't know time-wise if we were gonna have time to even do that with getting 7 people together. So Monday, 11/25 at 5 PM. Monday, November 25th at 5 PM.
Okay, I'll move that we schedule a public, or a special meeting for the purpose of discussing the manager's contract and manager selection on Monday, the 25th at 5:30 PM?
We said 5.
Rock.
5, okay,
That'll still work.
yeah,
We threw around a lot of options.
5 PM, okay.
All in favor?
Aye?
Opposed? Thank you. Any public comment?
I can come in for 5 o'clock if you want me to.
You gotta bring coffee, though. You gotta bring coffee.
No, that pushed him out the door the last time.
Turned and ran.
Very good,
Okay, fun process, hey?
very good.
You're just seeing the easy part. The prep was the tough part. Okay, any board member comment? You loved every minute of it, didn't you?
Yep.
Ernie?
On the fourth candidate, we need to record that somewhere, that the fourth candidate in the minutes
Yeah,
somewhere
it
has
will be
withdrawn.
recorded.
Has been withdrawn.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, plus it's on the recordings too, yeah. Yeah. Any other board member comment? Thanks for all your hard work. This was interesting. And we just had a couple motions.
Yeah, just the review of the motions for this meeting was, the agenda was approved, and we scheduled the second motion was we scheduled a special meeting on Monday, the 11/25 at 5 PM, and the purpose is for manager contract and selection of a manager.
Okay,
That's it.
we just need one more motion then.
Motion to adjourn.
Support. I
All
want
in
to stay.
favor? Opposed?
You could have just wrapped the gavel and joined it.
Motion carries 6-1.
346.